gamers, and hobbyists, artists, and photographers. This is the second Mapper's Delight. This is where we feature different digital cartographers and mappers from all over the globe. We have a pretty good lineup today. We have 9 different participants. Lady Shell will be moderating the chat, so if you have any questions or perhaps some ideas, or you just want to chat with her, you can do so in the Twitch. And also after the show, if you missed some of this, we will be broadcasting this after on YouTube. So once it's ready, we'll upload it. It should be ready by tonight. So without further ado, I want to tell you a little bit about our community. We're Fantasy Grounds College. We have a website, we have a YouTube channel, we have Twitch, we have pretty much all the social media platforms. Our main claim to fame is to teach people how to use Fantasy Grounds and also how to create things, and not to mention how to play. So we're hoping that this will bring the community together so that we can share the artistic and creative side of things, and also to inspire some of the community to make their own maps. Fantasy Grounds has a lot of capabilities, and when the new Fantasy Grounds Unity edition comes out, the map resolutions will be higher. You'll have a chance to use more assets. So I'm also hoping to inspire some of these artists to think about contributing to that when, especially when the new Unity comes out. They will have more chances to use higher quality images. Lady Shell has put up with me for several months. She's been doing a really good job. I appreciate her helping me today. Her job is not easy because she's going to be bouncing back and forth between Discord and Twitch. We do have some community members with us today. You will recognize some of them. We have the Map Hatter, Zane, Zovia, and we also have Vex with us. Tom Cardos is a community member as well. He may not be that active, but him and Nick both, Nick S, have been a part of our community for a while. And you guys know Chris. I mean, he's been around for a while. He teaches also. And then we have some new people, so I'm really glad to have all of you here. And our first person up is going to be Nick. Nick has kind of a unique he has a unique way of doing maps. He's also using it by software and programming, and he's also a part of our community. So I'm going to queue him up. And this is Mapper's Delight 2. This is from our community to yours. We're trying to help everyone get acquainted with the mappers and also the cartographers and artists out there. So this will help you guys get acquainted with people that are making high quality maps. This will also give you a chance to meet these individuals, and hopefully this will also create a good relationship between the mappers and the community. So without further ado, let's get Nick.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nick.
Hey, Nick. Welcome
Hopefully,
back.
some. Yeah, thank you.
Maybe we should do a sound check before we
I think
get
that's
all the way into this.
okay. It seems I
So,
can hear. That's great.
okay, good. So let's start over again. Thank God we didn't go halfway through the whole show like
Yeah,
that.
indeed.
Okay, so we have the Dungeon Tiles advertisement up here,
Hmm.
and this shows your Hex World, your Breeze, and this is kind of like your main title screen here. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you started, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty of your actual product that you're working on.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay. So, as I mentioned before, to you only, I've been playing tabletop RPGs for maybe 10, 15 years.
Hmm.
Um, the way I got into mapping itself was maybe about 5 years ago when I created my website, dungeonchannel.com.
Hmm.
I made it to share resources like tools and maps for other game masters, and I was inspired by some of them, some of those amazing artists. And so I started working on my own art for maybe the past 3 years or so. As you can see there, I mostly work on environmental art. I do dungeon tile sets, I do world maps, trees, and also animated weather effects. Last year, I also released a new website that's dungeon.app. It's a dungeon generator, and it creates high resolution maps that you can easily import into any virtual tabletop like Fantasy Grounds. You can also automatically generate dynamic lighting for some tabletops, and I'm hoping to add that functionality for Fantasy Grounds Unity when it comes out.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are outside of the hobby?
Yeah. I'm a little bit of a shy, socially awkward guy that works
Hmm.
in IT. Um, I I wouldn't know much what to say. Tabletop RPGs are really my main hobby. I also play board games with my wife quite a bit. We travel a lot, but for the most part, we're just two regular people living at home.
All right, cool. I'm on your main tile set ad here for the DM Essentials. Can you tell us a little bit about how that started and the process involved with it?
Definitely. So dungeons are what something I really like about tabletop RPGs. I just love delving in there, whether it's in video games or tabletop. That dungeons are the main thing that have my focus. So that's what I decided I would start with. Um, I created the textures myself for this set, and it has at this point maybe about 200 different tiles that you can put together to create your own. You can also use the dungeon generator to make it automatically in just a couple seconds and edit it if you like to add new rooms or take some away. So it's an easy way to create something complex. There's a lot of variation in rooms, and I always try to keep adding new ones every week or two, both to the generator and the pack itself, so that people can add some new things every time.
Nice. And you have other themes, right? Like other than the bricks or the stonework?
Yeah, definitely. There's actually quite a few different themes. That's the original one I made. But there's also an ice temple theme. There's a sort of stylized gray. A widely requested feature was a paper style, so I made one as well, like handmade. There's also a virtual world for sci-fi, and I also made for the people that like to use Photoshop and create maps themselves. I made a mask basically for different image editors that you can easily edit to add your own floors and your own walls. So you can use the layout, but with whatever textures you like.
Cool. All right. Well, I really like that idea. I've used the dungeon in Discord. So if you guys subscribe to Nick's Patreon, you get uh, greater access and more variability, and you can actually generate these right inside of Discord. It's really cool. So,
Yeah,
um, so I'm on the tile set dungeon generator webpage video.
hmm
So can you tell us a little bit about the website aspect?
yeah, definitely. The website, for starters, the website is free to use if you'd like. So there's nothing that's really behind Patreon besides the automatic lighting, the walls. You can also get a slightly higher resolution, but you already get 70 pixels per tile anyway, so that's good for most tabletops anyway. You can use a different seed, whatever you'd like. Same seed with the same options create the same results. So you can use them to use the same layout in different themes. The themes I already mentioned before. You can use different sizes. You can make a really tiny dungeon with just 2 rooms or something huge with over 100 ones. You can also create a multi-level dungeon, so you can add stairs going down and up to create a mega dungeon if you'd like. There's traps and other special rooms. And that's really about it. I try to keep adding new things every week, so there's a lot of variation. But yeah, yeah, that's a good overview of the website.
Good. So this would be one of your proudest moments, I would say. Um, This looks like a really good accomplishment. There's probably a lot of work on your end. Um,
Yeah, it was quite a bit. I actually learned how to code to create the website. It was,
wow, it's a good
yeah,
learning opportunity for you, for sure.
definitely. And I would definitely agree. It was my proudest moment. You can see
Hmm.
how it instantly generates so many dungeons. It's amazing to think there's over 1,000 or 2,000 dungeons created every day. And if I had to do that by hand, it'd be, I don't know, years.
Yep. So I'm really glad that you made the show. Now we've moved on to the trees. So I have a slide up here that's showing your different variations on the trees that you've made.
Hmm.
Um, this is the seasonal tiles for the outdoor, and it shows all the different states of the trees, like spring, fall, winter, those sort of things. So tell me, what was the, I guess, the genesis of this? What, like, how did this start, or where are you using these assets?
Well, the start of it, I think it was so long ago, and I think it began when I was using some of Gabriel Picard's styles.
Hmm?
He has some amazing art. He's one of the first ones that I actually got to present on my own website. Um, so his styles are great, but I thought I'd like a little bit more of a realistic look, and that's why I started creating my own work as well. I've mostly made trees in different seasons, both for forests and different environments. I think I also have a desert trees out, and I've been working on another one as well. Bit of a secret, but hopefully it'll come out soon. Um, so there's a lot of variations. There are over 100 different variations of trees in there, and I've also created animated trees from these as well.
It's great.
So yeah, if your tabletop supports it, you can use them as well. It's pretty cool.
So how do you decide what to include or leave out when you're creating and adding details? So, for instance, like your tile sets or even these trees, or
You're cutting off a little there.
I was saying, how do you decide what to include or what to leave out when you're adding details to your maps or your tiles?
I'm very sorry, still don't hear you. I heard how you, but after that, it kind of cuts off. So
Okay. I'm asking if you are um, basically, how do you decide to include, um, what to leave out or what to keep designing your tiles?
um, I'm sorry, still happening. If you could write it on text, perhaps I can start answering. And
Okay. Well, we can move on. No big deal. Um, so I was trying to get you to answer a question about how you would decide to include or leave out or add details.
okay, perfect. I can hear you great now. Um, how I do it? Well, I don't know how it is for everyone, but I almost never feel like something's ever truly done. Uh, if you leave me to it, I just keep adding more and more things until I get tired of it and call it a day. Um, there's definitely a minimum line of quality I need to cross, but after that, it's hard to stop adding things. Especially happens in my most more realistic dungeon tiles. I started adding like little rocks between each tile, and eventually, just okay, I was done. But until I got there, I just kept going.
As the art is
Um,
cursed.
yeah, perhaps it is.
Okay, next slide. We're talking about your desert trees, and this is another part of your outdoor tile sets for
Hmm.
the desert feature. So, what can you tell us about this?
Well, the main difference between this one and the previous set was that I added these, as you can see on the right, the second type of tile for trees, which is only a shadow.
Yes.
Um, it was a widely requested feature because trees are pretty big and they pass below it, so it would look weird if you had the tokens on top. So that's the main difference between them. Of course, the layout is specifically made for a desert, so there's a desert or a beach or sandy environment. So there's palm trees, there's cacti, there's that sort of thing. So that's the main difference between the two. Uh, Other than that, there's also different seasons for them. There's spring, summer, winter, and so on. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Cool. All right. So next slide. Um, we have some animation here of the trees, and I'm actually playing the animation for the chat. So we got the wind blowing through the tree that has all the leaves, and then we
Mhm.
have the growing tree on the right, which is showing the growth of the tree as it's progressing, and like almost like a stop time film animation thing where you
Mhm.
did a time delay on it. So, do you provide these assets for other tabletops, or was this an experiment, or that sort of?
Well, those you have there in particular, those were a little bit of an experiment before animations came out in some tabletops. The left one, the one that's blowing in the wind, I actually have it I believe it's on Drive Through RPG and also on Roll20 as well.
Oh, cool,
So you can actually use those. The animations are a little bit shorter with a little bit fade to loop them together so that they can keep going. They're about 5 seconds long. The one on the
nice,
right, however, that was mostly an experiment that didn't come to fruition. I think one of my players used it playing a druid at some point,
cool,
uh, but other than that, it hasn't really seen the light of day. So I don't know if I'll actually have something like that out in the open for people to use. If anyone wants it, I might be able to put it out there, that one in particular. But that's I haven't created more than that than what you see there.
nice. So, what is your most challenging aspect of creating a map? Did you catch that?
Yeah. Sorry,
Okay,
just the mute and unmute sometimes hit you. The most challenging aspect, um, I, I suppose, being content with your own work is challenging. Uh, I usually feel as there's something more I could do or add when I'm creating full maps, but since I mostly create the tile sets and other elements for people to create maps on their own, that part tends to fall on them. Uh, though I have to admit, creating cohesive assets is a challenge in itself. I mean, you need to make sure they all properly fit together, and I personally like making something where people can easily add to other artists' work or other artists' work to it, so that they fit with everything. For example, I have tried my realistic trees using ground assets from other people to see if they fit well with different grass backgrounds and rocks and so on, or uh, the other way around, my dungeon tile sets that fill with traps and decorations on top of them. So I try to make something that will fit properly with most assets out there, and that's a little bit of a challenge.
all right, good answer. I'm on your Hex World slide here, and as you can
Mhm.
see, there's a few different variations displayed. So, what was the story on this? I don't think I've seen this.
You haven't seen them?
No, this is new to me, kind of.
Okay, yeah. So I tried to go for a little bit more of a minimalistic style in this one. There's only 2 packs out at the moment. There's the one you can see on screen, and there's also a snow version of it. The idea behind them is basically to create a world out of it with hex tiles on it. The main, I suppose, problem I ran into it was that I created them both with hexes and also an isometric look to it. Uh, the isometric look perspective makes it so that you can see a lot more of the details on it. The main problem is that not all tabletops support that perspective. So you kind of have to make them either in Photoshop or some other program like that, and then upload it as a big image to whatever tabletop you use.
Okay,
Um, but there's also a new one I'm working on it. It's going to be a desert slash pirate western kind of tile set.
nice.
Um, yeah, so there's going to be a lot more to add to it soon enough.
I have a special request. I'd like to see the lava edition.
The Lava Edition.
Yeah,
Okay.
like islands, lava, mountain, the volcanoes, cracked ground, that sort of
Eh,
stuff.
Very well. I'll definitely keep it in mind.
One last question for you. I think this will be a good one. So, where do you see the cartography industry heading? So like, and if so, where would you like to see yours go?
Where's well, I would say the cartography industry is definitely growing. I can see more and more artists every day. Um, I think as tabletop games grow in popularity as well, the industry grows with it. Um, but as to where it's going, I think the most accurate answer I could give you is I don't know.
Okay,
Um, yeah, I don't think I'd know. Yeah,
that's
I'll
fine.
stick with it. Hmm.
Okay, so one other question then.
Hmm.
So why do you think maps are so important to people? What do you think attracts them to, to the maps and to the gaming aspect? Do you think it helps, or how does? What do you think? Personal opinion.
Well, you can certainly play without any maps or any visual aids for that matter. Uh, I personally find it that they greatly improve the gaming experience. Might be a little bit biased since I make my maps myself,
Mm,
but I think that's what it is. It's easier to stay focused, easier to understand your environment, your distances. I mean, especially for combat in RPGs, it makes it easier to keep track of how many enemies you have in front of you, what they are, what strategies you can use to beat the encounter. It can show you the atmosphere of a place, make you feel like you're actually there. Of course, you got to pair this with a good GM, with good descriptions, but maps are an amazing addition to any game, I would think.
I agree. I couldn't disagree with that. That is a very good way of looking at it. I like it for the immersion myself, and I
Hmm.
know a lot of other people appreciate good maps. So, um, the next step is Calerica. Nick, thank you for joining us, and I will see you around the community. And hopefully, Lady Shell was able to get your links out into the chat.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you
That's
very much for having me.
Yes, no problem. So next up,
Hello.
nice to have you.
Nice to be here.
Yeah. So I was looking at your little moose thing. I was kind of I forgot to hit you up before the show, but I really like the little motif that you have for your maps.
I'm sorry you're breaking up a bit again.
Okay. What I was asking is about your moose, the little icon for your name.
Right?
I really like that. I was gonna try to get you to um, send that to me, but I forgot all about it. But I really like the your logo, your branding.
Oh, thank you. I actually was thinking of a reindeer when I designed that, not a moose, but
Okay.
close enough.
Yeah, I couldn't tell from the size, but now that you say that, yeah, reindeer makes much more sense. So up here we have your map that is this one of your earlier maps, or this has the Seldera Forest, the Weaver Wood?
No, that's actually one of the maps that I included just as something that I find interesting in terms of style, since it's a bit different from what I normally do. I think there is. I did submit an earlier map, so I don't know where
Okay.
that is in your
Okay. Yeah, it'll come
slideshow,
up.
but
This how did you create this? Like, what tools did you use to generate this map?
this is Photoshop from start to finish.
Oh, okay. Did you make your own textures, or did you have to make your own brushes? Um,
Uh, Let me think. It's been a while since I made that one, but I think there are both textures that other people have made, and I think there is at least one in there that's mine.
okay, that's cool. I like the water and the rivers in it. They really show well against the green, and I can also see the roads. And some maps that I've looked at, including ones that I've made, I wasn't able to illustrate that very well. So that's a really good job on that. Also, the labeling is decent. Like sometimes when you see maps, it's very hard to see the labeling, so that's good. So, the Earthsea map, what is that about? Is there a story behind this, or
Like,
I,
are you seriously asking me what is Earthsea?
well, I mean for you, like, what was the story behind this map?
Well, no, I've just always been a huge fan of these books, and yeah, I just always wanted to map this place. This is pretty much my number one favorite fictional realm of all time. Ursula Le Guin's wonderful Earthsea, and I made this map shortly after I heard the news of her passing, and I guess it was both just fan art and also a sort of a tribute to her and her work and what they mean to me.
That's really cool. I like the detail and the color because it kind of gives it that old texture feel. But at the same time, it's still legible, and you're able to see all the details in the lines. I can also see where the mountains are, so it's really nicely done. And there again is your reindeer thing. I like that. Also, I see something. It says up here in loving memory of Ursula um, Wynn. Is that how you say her last name? I'm kind of butchering it. And it says, only in silence the word, only in dark the light, only in dying life, bright as hawk's flight.
Yeah, okay, you broke off again, but I take it that you were reading the quote.
Yes, the quote is really nice.
Yeah, that would be from the creation of Ia. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but yeah, that's a quote from the book or the books, more accurately.
Nice. So, yeah, this is a really beautiful map. It's large. So, do you put these out for print, or is this more for you to just show the world?
Yeah, I suppose the latter. I don't really have a print shop. I've been toying around with the idea of maybe putting one up one of these days, but hasn't happened yet. So I don't know if anyone would actually be interested in buying this.
I think I would, especially if I wanted to read the books.
Oh, you should. Oh, you really should. If you haven't.
So how do you think, or how do you suppose your maps would differ from what's already out there? So what's your unique style or your touch, or perhaps even your thought process?
Well, I think on one hand, I don't know if my maps are that different from what you see by other artists, but I think when you said that, what's my unique style? I think one of my defining attributes is the fact that I don't actually have like a singular style that I use that I know a lot of artists have. So I kind of always try to like do new things and try creating different looks for every map that I make. So maybe that's something that maybe sets me out a bit.
Nice. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, like outside of the hobby? I don't need to know all your particulars, but if you could tell us what life is like beyond the art, what's that like for you?
Uh, well, I wonder what I should tell. Like, well, I live in Finland. I'm 26 years old. I'm actually very late in coming to the RPG world in general. I've actually only been playing for a couple of years now.
Okay,
I've been a huge fantasy geek my whole life, though.
that's great. So do you know many of the other mappers, or do you have any individualistic people that you have collaborated with, or perhaps you have something in common with, or anything like that for the industry?
Well, I am a member of the Cartographers Guild forum, so I do know quite a few mappers. I think both Boki and Domino, who will be on next. Uh, I know both of them not well, but like I know them, have crossed paths with them many times, and know their work.
That's great. I hope you get a chance to speak with them during this, because that's part of the reason we're doing this.
Yeah, I did too.
So the Isle of Holies Rest. What is this story? What's the story behind this?
This was created for a mapping challenge at the Cartographers Guild forum. This was I forget what it was called, but basically what they did was they gave us the shape of the island, and each participant had to kind of make that shape and take that shape and make a map of that place in their own style. And this was my entry to that, and actually also a winner, joint winner though. But
Great. It's really cool. It has the tribal symbols below, and then it kind of corresponds to where they exist in the world itself. And of course, you have your mountain and trees and larger lakes and rivers to find. So I really like that map. It's really detailed, and it has a lot of good qualities to it. Do you do commissions or anything like that, or are you just kind of doing this as a hobby?
mainly as a hobby, I do the occasional commission. I did a bit more of them when I was still in school. Right now, I'm working full time, so I don't have that much time to take on commissions. But yeah, I do take the occasional commission still. Mostly work with fantasy authors rather
Oh,
than role players
yeah,
so
that's
far.
cool. That's good. Some people would rather do it that way. It's more laid back, I think, or maybe a little bit more lucrative. I think that this art is really well done for books and posters. Would you ever consider creating maps for like studios? So, like for instance, when the Game of Thrones was popular, um, whoever made that map obviously probably made some money off of it. But if you had another world that you could map, what do you think that would look like? Do you want to do sci-fi, or maybe there's an upcoming movie that
Well, I
you'd like?
mean, I'm open to trying new things. I definitely think like these fantasy maps are what I'm best at, like currently. But as for your question, would I work with a studio? Absolutely, if the chance presented itself, that would be fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So here we have La Smura. So what is this? This is a huge, huge map, and it almost reminds me of um, the Earthsea, except for it has different quality of parchment. It almost looks like a pirate map. Um, what's the story behind this particular?
This is actually the early map that I was
Oh,
talking
okay.
about before. Like it's not my first map by any means, but it's one of the earliest ones that I ever made, and it's actually one of the first ones that I actually got to a stage that could be described as finished, which is something that didn't start happening until like a couple of years into the hobby. So, but yeah, this is one of my oldest world building projects that I was working on, and
So is this one of
yeah,
your moments where you kind of went, "Oh, yes, I can do this," or
yeah, definitely.
yeah, because there's a time in your career of being an artist where you finally go, this might work, or this is good, or it's really hard to say your own work is good because you're probably your worst critic. But that's good feeling. I don't know how to describe it, but you get the tingling feeling, and you know that something's right, that all the things in the universe came together at that moment to
Yeah,
give you that inspiration. So that's cool.
yeah, definitely know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, you'll know it. So, besides doing this mapping, what tools or software do you use, like to make assets, or maybe you sketch by hand, kind of get a rough idea? So, what are your tools of the trade? You use what software or what platforms?
Like I said, I use Photoshop, and that honestly covers like 99% of what I do. I usually work with Photoshop from start to finish. I pair that off with the Cintiq 22 HD drawing tablet, and that's basically it. That's almost all I use. I also have Clip Studio Paint and Affinity Designer that I use for certain vector elements that I design. But yeah, most of it is Photoshop. I do all of my sketching digitally. Textures, everything basically is Photoshop. I am definitely a child of the digital art era.
Do you would you ever consider maybe doing a stream or more of an educational thing? So this is kind of like a showcase commercial type thing, but would you ever sit down in front of a Twitch stream and show people your work progress?
I
Like,
actually have done one stream where I basically was just mapping live, which was kind of a fun experience. So I think, yeah, if people would be interested in seeing something like that, absolutely.
I definitely would, and if you ever want to make that a thing, maybe do it once a month or whatever. Just let someone know or let us know, and we'll talk about that. But I definitely would like to see more mappers show their process to help teach and inspire other people who are trying to do something similar. In the community, we get a lot of questions about maps, and it would be very nice to be able to lean on or to ask our resident mappers questions. It really helps the community and it helps the hobby grow, and it also puts more of you out there in the long run. So I'd really like to encourage you to consider doing that, especially in your time zone. We have a lot of European EU community members, and it would be nice to have somebody to talk to in regards to maps and those sort of
Yeah, I'd definitely be down for that. That would be very cool.
things. Yeah. Is there any way that people can find you? I know that Lady Shell, I'm not talking about you personally, but your work. We have a main link for you for your website that shows your your portfolio. Do you have
Yeah,
Twitter and
and I
Twitch?
actually am very confused as to why I actually posted that link and not the link to my actual mapping website.
Okay. Um,
Uh,
we
that
can.
must have been just accident on my part, but yeah.
Okay. Well, what we'll do after the show is we'll get you to give that to Lady Shell, and when we post this video on the archives, minus the
Okay, yeah,
little,
that's actually,
yeah, we'll do
yeah.
that for
I
you.
think Lady Shell actually just posted the link in the chat. So
Perfect.
yeah, thank you, thanks Shell.
Cool. Nice. So yeah,
Yeah,
I'm really glad you made it.
yeah, it was really fun to be here.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to tell us before we move on to our next guest? Maybe some words of advice or wisdom for people who want to get into the trade.
Well, if you want to get into the trade, the thing that I wish somebody had told me when I was starting was that don't be discouraged if you hate your own work at first. Like it's a stage, it will pass. You are going to get past that. If you think everything you do looks terrible and you think you're never gonna make it, just stick with it. Try to get some maps actually finished, and you'll get there. Trust me. I'm not. I am by no means an extremely talented artist, so if I can do it, you can do it.
Well, that's good. That's about the best news or the best advice I've heard in a while. I agree with you. The more you do something, the better you're going to get at it. And you want to be open to trying different methods and different software platforms and also asking for help. A lot of people are embarrassed to ask, how do I do this? If you reach out and you join communities such as ours or even the campaign, a cartographer, those sort of things, those forums or the Cartographers Guild, you want to collaborate with people and work together and figure out how this stuff goes because we're all here and we can't think of everything ourselves and there's people
Yeah,
that have
exactly.
there's people that have gone on uh, and they're before us so they've have a lot of experience to share. So, Kalerica, I wanted to say thank you, and I noticed that you have more than just website stuff.
And you cut off again.
Sorry. I noticed that you have design as well. So you
I
do,
do.
okay. So you do layouts for like magazines and websites and
I actually don't do websites currently, but yeah, magazines, posters, that sort of thing. The
right on.
occasional logo design and
That is
stuff like
cool.
that.
All right. So any other things you'd like to say before we go on to our next guest?
I don't think I really have anything.
Okay.
No.
Well, I appreciate you stopping by. Feel free to drop down and chat before you have to go. I know it's getting late. Um, yeah, thank you for showing up. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, everybody.
Hey there, how you doing?
I've been good.
All right. So Dominique was one of the first individuals to respond to our call out for mappers. This is one of your sketches. Did you do this one by hand? This is the black and white sketch. It has a castle, camp, city outpost. There looks like a little swamp in there.
Yeah, that one, it didn't come with a name. I did that as a commission piece for a homebrew D&D. But yes, that is completely by hand, and then just
That is really cool. Did they give you any direction or any sort of idea of what they wanted?
yeah, I had a pretty basic sketch, and then I just talked through it, and I did it in pencil, and basically asked if everything was all right. And then once he okayed everything, I put it, fine liners and all the nice little details, and that's
You had cut out there?
oh, did you catch any?
Just the end. I missed the end.
Alright. So, when he first contacted me, he had a sketch of what he was looking for, which was a very basic sketch, and then, after I just drew in all the pencil work and had an idea of what he was looking for, then after he okayed that, I went in with fine liner and cleaned up all the little details.
Nice.
It was
So,
actually
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. It was a pretty quick, project that was
So next we have this Lorden map. Um, this is actually pretty detailed. It has a lot of towns and little titles, and it looks like waves, and even made your own rose uh, compass. Yeah. So what's the story behind Lorden?
So this was a map that I made. You can tell all of the names are in German. So it's from a German RPG gaming group that commissioned me. And this is the first commission piece that I got. And it was a lot of detailed description of place names, um, and a lot of little things that were added into this. But one of my proudest moments because I was commissioned for that piece.
That is really cool. So for you, what was the hardest or most challenging aspect of creating this map?
Well, that one was quite a few years ago. One of the most challenging things was for me, because it was my first commission piece, was really trying to get it to the level where I felt confident that it deserved to be paid for, basically. And I think I did that.
So that was more of a confidence slash experience thing for you. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. And he's actually commissioned me to make two other maps for him. So I've made several maps for that.
That's great. When you have repeat business, that definitely means you're doing something right. So that's good. That's good news, and that's good encouragement for others. So, what would you basically like to take your artwork from where it is now? So, are you just looking for more work? Or do you want a contract with the studio? Do you want to make stuff for RPG games or board games? I mean, where would you like to see your if this turns into a career full time? Where would you like to see it go?
Well, one big goal of mine is I haven't actually done a commission piece for a novel yet that I've so to literally pick up a book and open it and see my map on the inside would be a huge thing for me. That would be amazing. But yeah, other work like that, I love doing the commission pieces. And if I did a board game, I would love that too. I'm open to all of those things, but the novel with the book and I physically see it printed, oh, that would be awesome.
That's great. I hope to see that too. And if you ever get to that point, don't forget about us.
Yeah, I won't.
So, I'm looking at your sketch for the Isles of Umbar. So this shows an isle like almost reminds me of the UK, but not quite, as far as the shape goes. And then you have all the
Correct.
different crests and clans that are represented in this world. What's the story behind this?
So this is one of my most recent maps, and this was also a commission piece. This is by the Stubborn Heroes, which is a Dungeons and Dragons podcast. And I think Lady Trella gave her the link, so if people want to go watch that, there's a Spotify link to them. But this was a lot of fun, very high detailed map. And Adam, who's the DM for that group, had a lot of very specific things that he wanted to show, and I absolutely loved working on the little details here. And the crest designs are mine too.
It's great. Or were you invited to be in the show?
I don't think so. I think it's all done live
Uh-huh.
in one place. So I haven't been invited to be on the show, but the map is for their next campaign. So they're
Okay.
not on this current.
Yeah, maybe they'll adopt you or have you as a guest player once in a while. Never know.
Yep, you're absolutely
I think that would be a cool concept. You draw these maps for the artists or for the dungeon master or game master, and then you get to actually be a part of it. Would be really cool.
well, actually, he did kind of have me be a part of it because he made a one of the places is called Dominique's.
Dominique's.
It's I think it's a temple, Dominique's temple,
Oh, okay. So you have
and
a
so he
place.
he put in he made a place for me to put into my map, so that I'm hoping that at some point his players go to that location and learn about me. So he did add me to them.
Are you going to be the high priestess there, or the queen, or the regent lord? That would be really cool.
Pretty much what he told me, but I don't know. Obviously, that's he's still working on the second campaign, so I don't know all the.
So I'm on the pirate universe. This is a little bit of a deviation, or quite a bit. This is more sci-fi in nature, which I really enjoy. There's not enough sci-fi, especially in RPGs. What's the story behind this Hunting the Diamond Planet map? What's this about?
So this is a map I made for Cartographers Guild challenge, and in the challenge it was to create a pirate map. And I've played around with some other sci-fi map styles, which I love, um, but I wanted to go the opposite direction with the typical, seafaring, and it's very inspired by shows like um, Serenity, Firefly, which you can kind of see if you know what those shows are, and it's also inspired by Treasure Planet. But yeah, it's a space map pirate.
That is really cool. So have you ever considered adopting this type of work as your full-time profession instead of um, a 9 to 5 job?
So I already don't have a 9 to 5 job. I work for an organization that does sport camps for kids with disabilities, which is kind of on the other spectrum. Um, so I don't have a 9 to 5 job, but I love what I do in both aspects. So I don't think I could give up one thing for the other, if that makes sense.
It does, and that's very admirable of you to work with children that have disabilities. There are not very many people out there that I know of that would take the time to do that. It is very admirable. I have children with disabilities too, so I appreciate that. Hats off to you. Also, in our community, we have people that have some disabilities, and we try to work with them as well. So it's something that, as a human being, we probably should consider once in a while, even if we're not sure how to handle it or how to train to actually do it. So I really like this sci-fi direction. I think you have found a secondary genre that you could possibly get into. Also, this zodiac looking was this two sky view. This shows two constellations, probably from different hemispheres. What's the story behind this?
Yeah, so basically, since I was pretty young and in science, we were learning about astronomy and the stars. I fell in love with astronomy. So I'm a fairly big astronomy fan. And in fantasy, if you're gonna have a different world with a different surface, different land masses, naturally the stars would be different, right?
Yes,
And I haven't seen it being used very often, hardly at all. There's a few other fantasy star charts I've seen, but I really would love to see more of those, especially in the fantasy world.
I agree with you. The only ones I remember really seeing is I think Dragonlance had one, and there was a couple other worlds, but they don't get too deep into it. I agree with you that it should be a part of the canon lore of the planet or of the world that you're in, whether it be sci-fi or not. Um, so another question for you: what do you use for your work? Like, how do you work these maps? Do you use hand drawn, or do you use Photoshop, or do you use any other programs to achieve your goals here with creating maps?
Yeah, so I do both traditional and digital. So, like, one of the maps that you saw was totally traditional. But most of them, when I'm getting to a really high level of precision, I like to go digital. And most of the work is done in Photoshop. And then every once in a while, I do a few little things in Adobe Illustrator because I find that if I'm just working on shapes and certain things, it's nice frames. It's a little bit easier for me to do without painting everything.
Nice. Um,
And I also have an art tablet,
oh,
which I
cool.
use when I'm on Photoshop. I used to do it with just a mouse, and I can never imagine going back. Art tablets are a must if you're gonna do any illustration.
I hear you. Mouse are not very good for that. So, what is your main inspiration, or do you have a mentor for this hobby, or is it just all you? Or, I mean, what's inspired you to go down this road?
Yeah, it's all me. No, no, no. So, and other people have said this before. It's not an uncommon thing. Tolkien was the first of our kind. He was amazing. Christopher Tolkien kept on carrying his work. Um, and after that, it's C.S. Lewis and Chronicles of Narnia. Fantasy books that showed a clear representation of the world was such an immersion aspect for me. And when I started wanting to world build, that was the first thing I wanted to do was make the map. And that's what stuck with me more than the other aspects of world building is actually the map making.
Nice. So, are you a part of any community other than the Cartographers Guild? Do you subscribe to any of the other world building, like World Anvil or any of those other?
I really haven't yet. No. Cartographers Guild I started almost 10 years ago now, which is kind of crazy to think about. You know, so I was really young when I started there, and they just were a huge benefit to building me into the cartographer I am now. Other than that, I haven't done a lot in other
Okay. Are you playing in any role-playing games or anything like that? Do you do that, or you're more just doing artwork, kind of keeping to yourself? I mean, what does this translate into, other than expressing yourself?
I mean, I'm definitely on the art side a little bit more than I think a lot of map makers are. I love the world building aspect of it. I've done some gaming, but very light and not to the level that you guys would be, certainly. Um, but some.
That's good. A lot of the gaming industry, as far as like tabletop role-playing games, inspired to improve the skills that I have or don't have. So with the hobby comes all this kind of. So it's like you're kind of looking from the top down in this way. But if you start at the bottom and you look up, that's another way, if you know what I mean, your perspective on how you world build. So there's a couple different approaches.
Yeah, I love maps, so I don't really care how people get into it, but when they have a passion for mapping, I connect with them.
That's cool. Speaking of that, I think you have this beautiful, colorful map. It's Theano. What's the story on this
So that's the one I sent you guys yesterday. I'm so happy that you were able to plug it in last minute. I'm really thankful for that. This is a map that I originally made in 2010. I didn't send the previously. I should have. Um, but basically, it was one of my first maps I ever made. And I was like 13 at the time. Um, and recently, Cartographers Guild had a remapping challenge, and I wanted to remap this and this is my, finished map for that last challenge that I started 10 years ago now and just remade to look, at my level that I am now.
That is really cool. I like that concept and the idea that you went back and try to reinvent yourself. Do you ever think that you would like to turn this into a setting for a game, maybe, or a board game, or maybe even a strategy? I don't know. Or is it just artistic for you and kind of nostalgic and something you just want to keep to yourself in a sense?
I mean, possibly. I do have a lot of stories that connect with that map. If you look at the map, there's a huge tree on the right-hand corner. And basically, a very, very simple thing about that tree is it's inspired by frankincense and myrrh trees that basically, when you cut into the bark, it bleeds a sap. And those sap pods are supposedly very medicinal properties. And that's what that tree is inspired by. So to get to that tree, you have to go across this whole dangerous desert where there's no water except for where the tree is. And you basically have to push yourself to death to get there and then take one of the pods to revive yourself.
Wow.
Yeah, that was my whole concept. Right? So if you think about that on the gaming level, yes, that works beautifully. Um, yeah, but the whole reason there's a desert there too is because of the tree. The tree is soaking up all of the water and moisture in its roots, and the mountain range is stopping the roots.
Ah,
And so I have a lot of story behind this map that I would write if I was a better writer.
I hear you. Well, maybe you can
um,
take it into a game to inspire that creative writing. I know people use their gaming sessions to keep that process going.
I mean, I certainly hope so. I would like to see somebody play in this environment because it's a near and dear map to my
Well, you might be able to make that happen if you are so inclined. You come into the college and learn the culture and the ropes, and then include this into someone's campaign world. Of course, you're going to play in it, hopefully, and do something with it. See where it goes. See if you like it.
Um, yeah. Time frame for me, I'm not sure because I'm pretty busy at the moment. But if I have time and stuff like that, I'd love to check out your community and be a part of it.
Yeah, that'd be great. Love to have you. So, do you have any other words? I see that I got your last page here of all examples of your work, and it looks like you've kind of been doing this for a while. And we have your link going to your portfolio. And just so you guys know out there in the audience that these are just a snapshot of what these people, the cartographers, do. There are lots and lots of other examples on their websites. Lady Shell has been plugging that in the chat, and when we upload the video, we will definitely be including links to these websites where you can actually check out more of their work. We had to pare this down because of time, but these were the maps that these particular authors chose, or these artists chose. So hopefully this will also inspire you guys to create your own maps. So do you have any parting words or words of wisdom or um, salutations or anything like that?
Yeah, I think Clark kind of said it right when she's basically if you start out, there's nothing wrong when you start. You're gonna learn if you get information from other cartographers. If you go to Cartographers Guild, especially, um, the community of map makers is amazing. All of them that I've dealt with, no matter what their skill level was, basic or very advanced, they're all super encouraging and supportive of each other. So don't be scared of getting into it because everybody's awesome.
Next is Dan, and I think you guys kind of knew each other.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're
he's
both
also
on the
been on
Cartographers
Cartographers
Guild.
Guild.
We have Dan. So Domino, thank you for showing up, and we have Dan now coming up next. And I hope
Yeah,
the two
thanks
of
for
you get.
having me.
Yeah, no problem. I hope the two of you get to talk a little bit after the stream. All right, Dan. Bogey Maps is next.
Hello there. Glad to be here.
Yes, thanks, Dan, for showing up. So, tell us a little bit about your induction into gaming. That was probably a while back, like for me, same thing.
Oh, my wife made the grand mistake of buying me the early basic D&D box set way back in 1979, and she's regretted it ever since. I've been playing uh, Dungeons and Dragons ever since. Mostly I end up being the dungeon master. Uh, started with that basic set, moved up to first edition, and have been playing second edition advanced D&D ever since. I've tried a few other games as well, but that's been 98% my go-to. And I always liked maps, and I was never really thrilled with the typical blue and white maps that were on the adventure modules. And then a while back, I discovered Dungini and started making much more detailed maps.
Well, that's pretty cool. So what else inspired you to start making your own maps? I mean, you became the game master, so obviously you needed a way to illustrate your game world. But do you have a creative, artistic side that you need to itch, or is it something that you kind of felt, I don't know, embarrassed about, but then you wanted to work through it? some people use artwork to express themselves or to make money, or some people are really out there just to kind of keep the hobby going. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, I've never really considered myself to be an artist. Hand-drawn attempts at map were pretty pathetic. Uh, about 14 years ago, I stumbled across the Dungini website and the Dungini program, and that allowed me to make maps way better than I could ever have imagined that I could. And just for years of being on that, like everybody's talked about Cartographers Guild, for me it was originally Dungini, very supportive community. They were very great at helping me learn techniques and things I should do and shouldn't do, and the maps got better and better. And I ended up finding people contacting me about my maps because they liked them. And yeah, it kind of developed slowly over time. I've met a lot of people in the industry at different conventions, so it's been a lot of fun.
That's cool. Um, I was hoping that we could talk about this bear this bearskin rug. Um, yeah. So what was the story behind the rug?
All right, so I make a lot of my own mapping elements. Um, I'm again not a very good artist in terms of drawing things, so I use photography. I take pictures of things and then Photoshop them into usable mapping elements. That particular bear, is actually a real bearskin rug in a Cabela's, and I took a picture of it hanging up on the wall, turned it into a mapping element and started using it in some of my maps, but I also posted it on Dungini and Cartographers Guild where other people could use it. And I get a kick out of seeing that bear in, I'll bet I've seen it in over 100 maps made by other people posted all over the internet. Uh, it's uh, it's sort of a little rush for me when I see that bear. A lot of other things too I see pop up here and there, but I think that bear is perhaps one of the most popular things I ever made.
That's pretty cool. It definitely becomes a legacy. So when you leave this earth, that bear will still be around.
That bear will live on and on. Yep.
So now I'm on the map that shows the port. This has some boats, a dock. I can even
um,
see some transparent stuff underwater. So what's the story behind this map here?
well, like a lot of the maps you've asked about from other people, it was a contest on, I think it was on Cartographers Guild. It might have been on Dungini. We used to have contests there as well. Um, and I think we were challenged to do a waterfront map, and so I used some of these ships. Are ships that I made, or the littler ones are ships that I photographed. Um, the wave texture, pulled that off the internet. The transparency, I hadn't learned to use layers in Photoshop yet, and so the objects that are transparent are actually painted on top of the waves, but at a low transparency, so it actually looks like they're under the waves.
That's pretty cool. I see a story here. What would you think if you were running a game? What do you think the premise of this would be if you had to make it up for a one shot or something?
I That's a good question. So, if I were using this map for a game, uh, I think there would be someone who's been shanghaied or hijacked and been taken from one of the local taverns and is on one of these ships and they're about to set sea. So you got to rescue that person. That might be a good scenario for a quick game for one night. Maybe even have to get in one of these other boats and chase the bigger ship out to sea and rescue them.
I was thinking of a pirate theme, but also the a forbidden cargo type thing. Maybe
Yeah,
they have a dragon or some kind of creature on the bigger boat, and it gets
yeah,
loose and it wreaks havoc on the dock or something.
that would definitely work. I had a game that I played with my group when we were playing Spelljammer, and there was a egg of a creature that had been brought onto the ship that they didn't know about, and it's the creature's something like the alien from the Alien movies. It had that pop up on the boat, so there was mayhem ensued as they tried to run around the boat and kill the thing.
So, if there are other kinds of maps you would like to attempt to do, or if you've never tried, what would that be?
Whew. Definitely close-up battle maps like this one is my go-to,
Hmm.
whether it's a building or a street scene like this or dungeons. Those are definitely the ones I do the most. On Cartographers Guild, I get challenged every now and then to step out of my comfort zone and do some of the world regional maps. I'm not as proficient at those, so I like to try that once in a while, but I definitely fall back to this type of battle map. Haven't really tried any sci-fi.
Uh,
I just saw you put the bear there.
yeah, he's there. There's the bear. He's definitely hanging out, and there he is again.
Yep.
So,
That could be that creature that came to life on the
yeah, no
boat that you
doubt they
mentioned.
skinned him
Yeah.
after the battle. So now I'm on this bogey maps, Crypt of the Death Knight. So what's the story behind this?
Well, the story on this one is once again it was one of the contests, one of the challenges, using Don John's random generator. We had to run one of those random generators and then make a map based on it. And what I got was the lowest level of the Crypt of the Death Knight. So this was the map that I made for it. I didn't win, but it was got a lot of votes. It was pretty well received. That was probably 4 or 5 years ago. And a couple of years ago, I got the idea of making a whole bunch more of these. So I've made 6 or 7 levels of the dungeon now, and I'm planning on doing a Kickstarter pretty soon. I've made the world and the city above this underground tomb, and a little bit of a backstory where he was a high level paladin that broke his oath and became more or less a death knight or a demon knight, uh, and so he's got a whole bunch of undead that have rallied to him, and so the party's going to have to go in and rout out the evil. Typical stuff.
Well,
So hopefully I can get this all put together and up on a Kickstarter soon.
yeah, let us know if we can help you. We certainly get the word out.
I
Now it looks
appreciate
like
that.
he has a bearskin rug. So he definitely has the bearskin rug in
Yeah,
effect.
that thing keeps popping up everywhere.
So do you have any wisdom or some, just some kind of help for people who want to start making their own maps? Maybe you have some
Sure.
words of inspiration, or maybe you have some don't do this, don't do that, that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
So my experience was I started off again doing this just as a hobby. Somebody contacted me and liked my maps and wanted me to do some maps for their independent RPG they were putting together. Um, So my first bit of advice is don't sell yourself short. I did my first map for $50. I thought it was pretty cool. I was getting $50 for something I was just making for fun, but I probably put 100 hours of work into the maps for $50. So, you got to realize what your time and talent is worth. So don't undersell. Make sure you get what it's worth. And if you do have a formal contract, make sure that there is play that if they keep asking for more and more, that you're going to get paid a little bit more. I've had that happen a few times to me, where I agreed for a certain amount of money that I thought was pretty reasonable for 2 maps, and by the time I got done, I'd made 5 maps for that amount of money. So definitely, make sure you get what you're worth.
That's good
and
advice.
and even for someone starting out, working for exposure, there's no such thing as exposure dollars. You can't spend exposure.
So you're using a Dungini product. Have you tried any other products yet?
So primarily I use Dungini, and then I use Photoshop for adding in a lot of the special effects, like the map we're looking at. All of the shadow textures in the floor, that was all painted in with Photoshop. I've made a couple of maps entirely in Photoshop. The only other program I've really used is a new program that's been developed called MapForge, and that looks very, very promising. And at some point, I'm probably going to transition over to using MapForge more. Uh, but right now, Dungini, that's my comfort zone, so that's where I'm familiar with it. But Dungini is an old program. It doesn't work on modern computers unless you're programmer level that you can, you know, tweak all the settings. So, and I'm definitely not that person. So, at some point, I'm probably going to have to upgrade to the newer MapForge program. It's got a lot of promise. They're still working some of the kinks out of it, but it's a very good program.
All right. So commission. So do you still do them? Or are you kind of on hiatus, or what's your
Well,
status?
I work full time, and like everybody else, a busy life. So I don't take a lot of commissions. Um, I have a friend who commissions me to do a lot of private maps for him, so I do that primarily. But every now and then I'll take on a commission for someone who's doing a Kickstarter, writing a new module. Again, those are the ones that end up being the most amount of work for the least amount of return, but still can be a lot of fun. But I'm not out actively seeking commissions.
Okay.
I'll just pick them up now and then when something catches my interest.
Right on. So any other things you'd like to say before we move on to the next guest?
No, this is a great program you've got going, and I'm glad to have been able to participate. I I'm getting hooked in here pretty good.
Yes, I am. Thank you for having me on, Levern.
No problem. Zane is one of our community members as well, and he's been with us about 3-4 months now.
Not even. I first got Fantasy Grounds on Black Friday. I've been playing tabletop role-playing games for years now, and like anyone into it will tell you, it's hard to find your local local groups, your local players. Where are they? You never find them. And we've just been talking back and forth with a lot of people about maybe starting to play online, doing more of that. Which virtual tabletop should we get into? And we decided to go with Fantasy Grounds. And Black Friday had their sale. I just kind of went, let's do this, and started from there. So I joined you just shortly after that in December.
Nice. I really like your interactions in the community as well as your wife. It's really cool to have you guys here. And I also like the fact that you are into other genres, not just the standard run of the mill game. So you like Call of Cthulhu and maybe some sci-fi mixed in there. Um, so what is your history like with gaming itself?
Well, I started gaming about, I'd almost say 39 years ago when I was 12 years old. The original box set of Dungeons and Dragons quickly advanced to the hardback AD&D first edition books. I actually had a first edition copy of the Deities and Demigods, the controversial one with the Cthulhu mythos before they had to
Yeah, I
take
had
it
that
out.
too. Yeah.
And that's actually what got me interested in Call of Cthulhu, because that was my first introduction to it. It's like, these are some strange looking things. And I wonder what that's all about. And that's kind of how I learned about Cthulhu. And I didn't really start playing Call of Cthulhu until around the mid 90s. I had a friend of mine bought a copy of it in high school and ran me through the introductory adventure of it. Once he came over, he lived pretty far away, came over, we played it. I didn't think too much of it because that was just me and him. I didn't know what to do really because, what do I know about supernatural things other than it's always the land developer in the mask that the kids and the dog pull off. So I'm like, I don't know what to do here. uh, but I had been wanting to get back into it. I started reading more Lovecraft, and by the 90s, I said I was near a really cool bookstore that had a lot of used books, a lot of different things you can get, and I just started going off with getting into that as well as playing a regular Planescape game that my wife was DMing. And we've run through a few iterations of my wife DMing second edition Planescape through the years. And we've evolved into doing fifth edition now and Call of Cthulhu as well. So it's a combination of playing those two primarily. But throughout as a teenager, one of my hobbies was to go to the game store and see what the game du jour was. I had gotten really into the James Bond role playing game back in the 80s, which was a great game for doing a one on one where you have a one DM, one player, or one DM, two player, because you don't really want too many more secret agents than that in an adventure. So that was a really good game to.
We lost your voice.
Oh, I just cut off at the end. Did you hear me?
Just the last word I missed.
Oh, yeah, I just said that I was into the James Bond game because you could play with one or two other players.
Yeah, I remember that game very well.
It was
Uh,
a very well done game with the just the mechanics of it. I thought were really good.
so
And
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, is that's kind of one of my basis for mechanics in games, especially percentile-based games. It's like, how does it stack up to the way they did? And then really, that game was very made for the spy genre. So there's a lot of things that really worked well within the spy genre, but a lot of the elements in that game I thought were just really translate well into a way to play a game like that.
So I'm on the slide where we're talking about the sinister shopkeeper. It's a modern era setting.
Yes.
So what can you tell us about this? I see that you have a map that you're going to work from.
Indeed. I wrote this for Fantasy Grounds College. This was the one shot I ran just before Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to do a little Cthulhu because there's a lot of interest going back and forth about playing Cthulhu, but majority of people who are playing games out there know D&D and say, I've heard people talking about Cthulhu. I like to play it. So I wrote this little kind of Christmas one shot, and it takes a legend of Saint Nicholas, actually, where there was a shopkeeper, a butcher, who had during a famine taken some kids and pickled them, and was going to sell the pickled kids as food for the village. And Saint Nicholas comes in and discovers what he's doing. And I kind of took that legend and kind of went with it into where I developed him as a sort of a Cthulhu version of a were rat in a way. So the guy who pickled the kids doesn't repent. He actually becomes this kind of were rat creature. And now it's modern day New York City. And has this old world butcher shop right here off of the park. And it kind of goes from.
So you're using real world inspiration.
Exactly.
So I see the maps you've created, the apartment, and a couple levels for it. So this is the shopkeeper's dwelling. These are the maps I'm looking at right now. The ground floor is a shop, and then he has like an apartment above, and then like a secret area.
Yes, exactly. So the ground floor is his shop. Second floor would be his dwelling place, and his basement is where he can get into the sewer. That's what that little round circular grate is, because he goes in and out of the sewers. And he's got that little secret room with the guy in the cage and his little butcher knife, some various stuff. The bottom of that basement map, I figured everyone's got these in their basement. That's his boiler and the little pilot lights on, and that's the only thing you can really see in there.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of modern maps, so it's nice to see some of these pop up. So I'm not going to have to ask you how your maps differ, but you obviously like a variety of things, which is good. But what is your challenge mainly for creating these? Like, is it assets, or is it the software, or just the burnout factor? I mean, what's your main challenge when you create these maps?
My biggest challenge is time. I have many, many ideas, many scenarios I'm working on, things I want to do. And uh, just my New Year's resolution this year was to write all the things I want to do down and try to start checking off the list of things I want to accomplish. And then I'll start like a couple of weekends ago, I really got into the idea of playing with Fantasy Grounds themes. So I totally went off my script, my list there, and I started saying, how can I theme Fantasy Grounds and make a different look to it? So I wasted the whole day doing that, but that was fun. I'm a web developer by trade as well as the designer, and Photoshop is something I've been working with since even before I started 20 years ago down my career path. So playing around in Photoshop and doing little Photoshop things, something I really enjoy. And I say I wasted a whole day, but actually it's like I had a lot of fun because I love playing with Photoshop. Most of these maps I use a online tool that's called Dungeon Fog.
Uh-huh.
I think it's a company in Austria that has put up this website. I'd say the only challenge with it, they give you a lot of things. The license costs a bit, especially if you want to use your stuff commercially. But other than that, the biggest challenge with it is as you layer and layer stuff onto your maps, you're browser based, so you're getting a little slower and slower, and so you kind of have to put up with that as you're putting things in. But it also helps you not put too much in your maps. These are probably as much as you'd want to go putting stuff into a map, this butcher shop.
Okay. So are these three separate projects within Dungeon Fog, or is it different layers?
That's actually different layers. You can add different levels beneath, below, on top of. You can actually kind of fade it out so you can see the level below. So that way, as you're drawing your upper level, you can see where the walls are for the stuff below. So you can base stuff on it, and you can fade stuff in. And then all those lighting effects come from what you can do in Dungeon Fog.
Nice. All right. So moving on, we have the Hudson County Lunatic Asylum project. So what's the story on this thing?
Well, I decided I want to do something close to home, so to speak. I live in New Jersey. I used to commute to New York City all the time, and this would be right outside a train station, the last stop before you get into the city. Now they built this train station a few years back as a transfer station. It's where on the topo map towards the upper right hand corner, you can see the railroad tracks kind of crisscrossing. There's a big station there. Uh, but as I was thinking about local stuff, and Cthulhu was always talking about asylums, I started doing a little research. And apparently, up on this hill, it's basically that area. You get the Hackensack River, you've got swampland, and you have this big rock that juts out of the swampland. And it's actually what the Prudential Rock, a lot of people think that's Gibraltar. Well, the guy who created that Prudential logo was commuting into New York City, passing this rock every day, and that was the basis for this thing. It's the Snake Hill, and they don't call it Snake Hill; they call it Laurel Hill now because Snake Hill sounded sinister. I decided, okay, you got Snake Hill, you got some history, and you got serpent people in Call of Cthulhu. There's something here, and I found out that there was an asylum up there, amongst a prison, an almshouse, all sorts of stuff. And I found a website that shows pictures of old uh, asylums. And I found that photograph of the asylum. I actually found that little map of the layout of it. And I started working on it. Obviously, it's kind of a huge project to lay out a building this big. So really, I've only gotten the middle section, the administrative office. And I can't really tell from the map that was provided how much the size of things, but I decided what I could fit on a map that would work well in Fantasy Grounds and kind of went with that as a basis for the idea.
Yeah, so I see this ground floor here. What were do you use Dungeon Fog to make this as well?
Yeah, that's completely Dungeon Fog.
It's pretty cool. Dungeon Fog includes the lighting, right? Or is that done separately?
No, that includes the lighting. You can tell Dungeon Fog what items are lit up and what items cast shadows, how bright they are, what color the light is. So the trees up in the top, I think I put a little red fire underneath of them and then put the tree on top so they have that kind of glow. Uh, then I made some green ones that have that greenish glow, and I just started just having fun with it. These are the first few things I tried out in Dungeon Fog, and I just wanted to see what was possible with the lighting effects. Because with Cthulhu, you kind of want to, have that kind of spooky darkness, uh, and then you could put these in your Fantasy Grounds games,
Cool.
and just kind of give that.
So this is the second level, so you're still working on that, or is that
Yes. So I would probably go in and figure out these are going to be administrative offices. So probably put a little bit of furniture in them. But other than that, you can see the back buildings. You're looking out onto the roof of the back buildings in this one. And you can see how the front part down at the bottom of the map is going to be open. So the first floor is 2 stories, and there's sort of a railing you can look down. Exactly right
nice? So here's the top floor. Again, this is another top down for an upper level that might be storage or more offices or
Yeah, exactly. And you can even see that Dungeon Fog has handled the background with this. So the roof of the back buildings looks further away from the from the upper floor than it does from that middle floor.
nice. All right. So I'm going to ask you some other questions about mapping. Um, did you have any mentors or any influences towards your hobby of making maps, or is it all from you? Or
Uh, well, mostly from me. I've been drawing maps for games since I was a teenager, and back then it was take a piece of graph paper and a pencil and kind of sketch out a dungeon. Obviously, some of the stuff I've seen during my game playing, so different modules or adventures that were out there, you'd see a map and you get the idea of uh, what constitutes a map. At one point, a friend of mine, I'd been always into maps my entire life. I mean, I started out as a 4-year-old with going on trips with my parents, and I was always stealing the road map and figuring out where we are on our trip. And a friend of mine said, "Why don't you get into cartography?" I'm like, "Cartography?" He's like, "Yeah, map making." It's like, I know what it is, but how do you get into that? And I actually was a applied geography major at some point before I ended up dropping out of college and going back into doing web design development. But for a while there, I was taking applied geography. I wanted to do geographic information systems. And I got to take a few interesting classes, land surveying and map and image interpretation. Half of it was interpreting maps, and the other was interpreting aerial photographs. And you can learn a lot from those just by measuring stuff on the photograph and figuring out if you know the day and the angle of the sun at that particular coordinate on the planet. You could tell certain informations from looking at an aerial photograph. A lot of cool stuff there. But again, I ended up falling out of this and ended up becoming into doing the web development because uh, really I was always into art. I was always into computer programming. And when web development kind of came to its fruition, I found that it fulfilled both of those things that I was really good at.
it's cool. So I'm looking at the Tavern of the Goat. So what's the story on this one?
Over Halloween. Well, Halloween this year, I usually run a Call of Cthulhu face to face for Halloween, and this year, Halloween fell, I think, on a Thursday. So Saturday, which would be a good gaming day, was the 2nd of November. 2nd of November is, of course, All Souls Day. And I had this idea. I don't even remember where. Actually, I guess it was. I do a lot of research for Call of Cthulhu based on some of the real world mythologies.
Mhm.
And one of the interesting mythologies I had found that actually maps up really well with Cthulhu is Basque mythology, mythology of the Basque people of northern Spain, which a lot of people don't know anything about because you don't really hear much about it. We don't actually know that much about it as a culture itself because a lot of that's been lost to the ages. But what we do know and what's there, a lot of it kind of parallels. So I came up with this idea of writing this whole thing about uh, the Basque witch trials that took place in 1609, uh, with the when the Inquisition got involved in this whole thing with Basque witches. And then after there was the trial, they sent this one guy into the Basque country to just double check and see if there are any more witches there. And he ends up saying, no, it's kind of, there are no witches. The Inquisition itself was not really interested in pursuing witches. There was this one abbot who was kind of witch crazy in the area. And he had gotten I think I know in my adventure it says this, and I think it is true to the fact of the matter. The populace, this abbot was so kind of crazy. The populace asked the Inquisition to get involved because it would go better if the Inquisition got involved. And I wrote a whole story, a whole uh, scenario about this. And of course, it's Cthulhu, so yeah, the witches are real, and there's Cthulhu mythos creatures involved. But one of the scenes in the town that they'll end up going to was going to take place in the tavern of the goat. And it's really funny you're talking about the bearskin rug, because they had a bearskin rug in Dungeon Fog, and I threw a bearskin rug in there to make it look kind of
There it is.
rustic in the 17th century. And there it is, right before the fire. There's the comfy, the red thing next to that's the comfy chair. If you're a Monty Python fan, you got to have that in when you're talking about the Spanish Inquisition. And then some food, some tables, some stuff. And that is actually the first map I started with Dungeon Fog. So it's got just probably enough detail. It's not heavily detailed, but just enough for what it needs to be. And I think any more than that, and you're kind of throwing too much on. So.
Okay. Well, this is really cool. I'm glad to see some variety, and also the fact that you guys have joined our community and have become, I want to say, very active. So I appreciate you coming on the show. Do you have any other things you'd like to tell our community, or wisdom, or um, anything like that that you'd like to share before you go on?
Sure. I'll just say a couple of things. One, I really appreciate being able to come on today and show these works. As I said, this is starting out as more of a hobby, but as a web developer, I am quite familiar with doing like side projects and stuff. And one of the things that Dan was talking about, there's a term for it called scope creep. And if you're going to do anything professionally, for clients outside. Clients, you're the expert. You know how long it takes you to do a map. You know how long it takes you to do whatever it is you're doing. You have to talk to whoever's commissioning you and define what's the requirement is. Define what they want, talk it out, get it down to this is what you're providing, and this is not what you're providing, and that way you kind of avoid scope creep, which means the scope of your project keeps like going on, and you end up making more maps for no more money. So yeah, so that's very important when dealing with any kind of side project. Knowing, having the clients understand this is what you're getting. This is outside, so it's always fair. And in my professional life, doing any even stuff that I'm working on my professional job where project managers will always just tell the client that's out of scope. Now, out of scope is fair enough to say because something's out of scope, not out of scope. Okay. Again, thanks for letting me on, and I'd like to hear what the rest of the people are going to talk about today and see their work. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Zane. Next up, we have Zovia. So, Zovia, how are you doing today?
Hi, how's it going?
Pretty good. I wanted to thank you for showing up. I'm glad to always have you on here. You were a part of Mappers Delight 1, and I
That's right,
appreciate.
yeah.
Yep, so you're an alumni like Chris. I was really enamored with your maps, I want to say, when I first started Fantasy Grounds. I actually learned about you through Digital Dave. Then, as time went on, I won, I think, one of your map packs from your new store,
Yeah,
and
I
I
remember
really,
that.
yeah, I do. I remember that too. It was really cool. You've always been pretty open to me and communicated with me, and I thought that was pretty cool of you to take time to talk to me and believe in what we're doing in the community.
Yeah, you're doing good work here.
I appreciate that. So I have your first map up here. So can you tell me a little bit about the story of this? Like, how did you create it? That sort of thing. What tools did you use?
Yeah, this was my first map, of course, or my first professional map. Usually what I did is I made maps for my games, just using assets that you find on the internet or whatever, putting them to. Someone said maybe you should make them professionally, so I tried that out. This one is also, I couldn't use other people's work, so I had to create everything from scratch, all the textures, the assets, and all.
And
One thing I
go
one thing I
ahead.
really like to do though that I didn't see happen a lot is lighting and shadow.
Yeah, I see that coming through the windows, and then the lighting from the reflection of the fireplace, and then also the sunlight coming in from the southeast. I can see that definitely in the renderings.
Yeah, and it helps a lot with depth too, because it's a top-down map. It's very hard to see in that orthographic viewpoint how to see depth. Everything seems so flat, and shadows and lighting really help show the depth of individual objects.
Now, we were talking about something earlier, and I see it in this. I see a similar asset, not the same asset, but if anyone could point out what you see here, besides Zovi and myself, I see something in the upstairs map that kind of makes me chuckle. We were talking about this earlier in the show. There again is a bearskin rug.
Oh, that's right, yeah. Well, in a fantasy setting, I think that's probably the cheaper of the rugs.
Yeah, I wouldn't
Bearskin
doubt it.
rather than something woven.
Yeah, no doubt. I just find it hilarious that there's tons of bearskin rugs. Now I'm going to be looking for those every time I look at a map.
Right.
Okay. So I'm looking at the different aspects of your shading, and you have your modern day, night, empty, those sort of things. And then I have some examples of your map packs in the slide. So what's the story behind this particular graphic here?
Of the multiple
Yes.
alternates. Yeah.
Yes.
Instead of making one map, lots of people like to have different things. So what I usually do is make day-night versions. I have versions that are decorated and ones that are empty, and I also have the individual decorations with it, so you can decorate the maps like you want. Maybe you want to move a table around when playing or something like that, so you can do that. Also, another thing I did is I was trying to do sci-fi maps, but they didn't really catch on, so I just kind of bundled it in with my fantasy map. So every map I do a non-fantasy version of it. So it might be modern, it might be sci-fi or post-apocalyptic, something like that.
That's cool. So what was one of your influences, maybe, or did you have a mentor, or did this all come from you, or what inspired you to start making these maps early on?
Well, just friends, really, because I made them for my own games. I play a lot and I DM a lot. So I just kind of found maps lacking for what I wanted. I wanted to have more detail. I wanted the maps to set a mood for the players. I want them to feel immersed into the room. I want them to be able to feel it or smell it, hear the sounds. So I thought, more detail would be helpful for that. But I'm not really much into the industry, so I'm not really aware of too much that's out there. So I didn't have a mentor really. Just people that follow me and encourage me, and I mainly make it for them. So that helps to guide me.
That's great. Would you consider maps a work of art, in your opinion?
Certainly, work of love. Anything that a person creates, I think, is art.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, all different types of art exist out there. But you're saying it's a labor of love, and I agree. That's definitely on par with having this much dedication and learning how to use these tools to your advantage. How long have you been doing this?
3.5 years.
So 3.5 years you've come this far. That's incredible. So I mean, that that says a lot. Like, you must have put a lot of time into it, but some people, it takes them 10, 20 years to actually
Yeah.
get to this point?
Well, I just jumped in head first. It's I made it a full-time job. Well,
That's
it's
awesome.
full-time work. It wasn't full-time pay, but I just gonna put everything into it. So I just did it day and night for 3.5.
So I noticed last year you launched a store. It's been out for at least a year. How's that going for you? I mean, I don't need to know financial numbers, but like, how is that going as a business side of things?
The store, not so much. You know, every now and then someone will pick up some stuff they don't have. That's about it.
Okay,
But it pays for the website. It pays for itself,
that's
at
cool.
least.
Yeah, that's a good thing, I guess. It gets your work out there, and you're not really having to come out of pocket too much. So that's cool. What games are you currently playing in now?
Well, I'm in a Dungeon of the Mad Mage game. Don't get to play too many, but my favorite would be sci-fi, anything sci-fi. But I really like to play anything. I like to role play,
Cool. I've
so
seen
I
you
can
play.
make any character or play any game.
Yeah, I've seen you play a few times, and you're no joke. You're pretty brutal at times.
All right, that gets into the character.
So Zovia, I have one of your favorite maps up here. And these are maps that I have seen in the past, but tell us the story behind this one. This is one of your favorite. This is your favorite right here. The
Yeah,
Galleon.
that map I spent about a month and a half on. I did a lot of research on ships. I saw so many ships for maps, and they were kind of, they were made more for a game map, right? It
Mm-hmm.
makes sense, you have your squares, people to move on. You got to have room for your boss battles, that sort of thing. But I wanted to make a map that was a little more true to being on a ship. So I learned a lot about ships, not just about what ships were made and how they were called and what the decks they had, but what it was like to live on one. So I kind of made this version of a galleon based on playing it and being able to move around in it, but also being
Well, that's
close
great.
to accurate.
So you're saying that you did a lot of research before you developed the map, or as you went, so you can create the map more realistically.
Yeah, I didn't want to make a map or this ship without knowing something about ships.
That makes a lot of sense. I don't know how many times I've attempted to do something not knowing a jack thing about it. So
And there is a bilge layer.
yes, I see that. So have you accepted any commissions before?
Yeah, this, I don't get too many, but I have had a few. I think my style is a little too specific, and it doesn't mesh well with a bunch of other maps. So I think if anyone wanted to commission me, they'd probably want all the maps done by me because it's, so unique.
Right. So, what type of software are you using again? Is it Pro or Photoshop or GIMP or?
Well, I use Linux, so I use Krita. Krita is similar to Photoshop, but it's more geared for painting, and all my stuff is hand paint.
Nice.
I mean, it's hard to tell, at this level. You have to kind of zoom in, but
Yeah.
that's kind of why I put that detail. Because, the players are playing. They can always zoom in on the map and see details and maybe ask the DM about what's this hiding under this table or that sort.
So you have a Patreon and you have a store, but I also noticed that you had some maps on the DM's Guild or a role-playing RPG now.
Yeah, I put a few there to see how that would go. There's one for free.
Mm-hmm. Lady Shell has your links, and she can post your main Patreon one. But we will also include your other store things when we post the video.
The Patreon's definitely where it's at because if you sign up there, you immediately get access to the backlog on Patreon.
Nice.
And each map kit has dozens of maps with it, so there's hundreds of maps.
All right, so this is your latest work that I have up here. This is a large dungeon. I don't think I've ever seen you make something this large before. I've seen you make rooms, or maybe a few rooms together, but this is a pretty large map. So what's the story on this?
Well, I've been getting requests for larger maps, so I've been kind of heading in that direction, just getting larger and larger. A good, well, Dungeon of the Mad Mage, of course, that I'm playing in currently, lots of layers of complex dungeons. So that kind of inspired me to do something similar.
I mean, that thing is huge. It's for Fantasy Grounds for the Unity edition, you can use that. I know I've been testing it, and I can use larger maps now, and it's been really nice. So that sort of map will actually fly in a newer, updated, modern version of Virtual Tabletop. So that's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Even for Fantasy Grounds, I've been kind of increasing the DPI to 100.
Mm-hmm.
That because more computers can handle it now, and that gives something for players to zoom in on to see some detail.
Yeah, I like that. It gets old after a while when you got a big blurry photo. I'm really looking forward to those
Yeah.
changes coming up. So do you have any advice, or maybe you would like to talk to us about what's your your aha moment? You have to have something in there that you can share with us, that like how you knew that you wanted to do this. Also, when you actually give advice to people, what would you want to tell them?
Well, I think the most important advice for anyone trying to do anything creative, I guess, an artist is never happy with their work. You're never going to be good enough. There's two different types of people. There'll be the ones that give up because of that, and then the others that will just try to get better.
Do you know many of the other mappers?
No, not really.
So you pretty much keep to yourself?
Yeah, I'm. That's a bad thing for me. I'm very, I guess, insulated.
Okay. So other than playing in games and drawing and creating your maps, is there anything else you can tell us about who is Zovia outside of the hobby?
Well, outside of working doing these maps, I do like to play video games or also RPGs. I do get a lot of inspiration from that.
Okay, cool. That's not the first time I've heard that, for being inspired by video games.
Oh
Um,
yeah, loads.
yeah. So you like video games and you work full time? Is that right?
I do this full time. Do
Oh,
maps full
nice,
time. Yeah.
nice. Okay, so
Yeah, these maps sometimes take at least a week. Some take a month to
wow.
make.
So how long have you been using Fantasy Grounds? That's my next question.
I used Roll20 a little bit for a while, and then when I found out about Fantasy Grounds, I tried that out, and most of my friends were using it, so I've been using that ever since.
So what is your working relationship with Dave? I know that you guys have been friends for a long time. Are you guys just gaming buddies, or did you know each other in person, or?
No, we don't know each other in person, but we've been friends since before he started doing um, the DMing.
Nice.
We played games together. I think we met in Neverwinter Online.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that was back in 2013.
Uh-huh.
So that's been about 6, 7 years now.
You guys still play?
Well, he's been wrapped up in this Fantasy Grounds Unity right now, so he's kind of been boiled in that. So it's been a little bit of a break. but I
Okay.
do play with others as well.
Okay, cool. Any other last words or things that you want to tell us before we go to the next guest? Got
Not that I
anything
can
new
think
in the
of.
works?
Well, this dungeon map that you showed is part 2, I think, in a 5-part dungeon. And the main room is going to be inspired, or is inspired, I haven't finished yet, with the throne room in the latest Star Wars movie, if anyone remembers that. No spoil. So I get inspiration from movies too.
Yeah, that's really cool. I do too. Especially like fantasy movies. It inspires me to want to world build. That's one thing I really like to do. And I need people like you to draw some maps occasionally. So that's awesome. Yeah, so I'm really glad you made it, and I will see you around in the community. I know you won't be that far away.
Oh yeah, I'm always around.
And I would really like to play in a game with you someday.
Yeah, I'd like that too.
So any questions or comments or anything else?
No, thank you for having me here, and thank you for doing what you do here.
Thanks, man. Thank you. So next we have Tom Kartos. Been waiting to get you on here. I've really been checking out your work a lot lately. How are you
Thanks,
doing?
Darren. Yeah, really good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. What is your main inspiration? Like, what started you into this field?
That's kind of a hard question to answer. I came across this field, this kind of work, a little bit by accident. I wasn't really familiar with tabletop RPGs, Dungeons and Dragons, anything like that until a couple of years ago when I started teaching myself to draw, and someone recommended a few actual play podcasts to listen to while I was learning. I kind of got hooked on RPGs and tabletop RPGs through that, and saw some of the work of other people like Mike Shale and Jared Blando, and thought it looked like a lot of fun and something that I could try myself.
So, how long have you been doing this? Just recently, or what's your time frame like?
Yeah, so the map you can currently see on screen was Test. It was the first one I tried, and that was about 7 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started doing this professionally about 5 to 6 months ago.
Nice. And how's that going for you, business-wise or industry-wise? Are you getting commissions, or are you just kind of filling up your portfolio? I mean, I don't need to know numbers, just how is that going for you as a hobby and also as a profession?
Yeah, it's going really great, thanks. It is a full-time job for me right now. I'm doing maps 60 to 80 hours a week. I'm about 50% Patreon, 50% commissions at the moment. And about half of those commissions are private and about half of them are commercial for independent game developers.
That's great. So you're getting some bites or some
Yeah,
work.
absolutely.
And are you keeping organized enough so that you remember which stuff you need to work on? I know some people that get into this, they take on too many projects and they don't realize, initially anyways, that what they have to do.
Yeah, I mean, I started as a freelance artist when I started doing this. I'm still learning the business side of things a lot. I'm keeping on top of the organization. I'm always juggling a few projects at once, but yeah, generally it's manageable.
Have you met with any of the other cartographers before this point, or spoke with them?
Of the cartographers that we have in stream today, Dominique was the only one that I was previously aware of. I hadn't met any of them, although I've collaborated with some other cartographers in the industry and in contact with quite a few of them.
That's great. So going on to your next piece, this is the Eisenheim Manor. So this is fairly recent. So these are snapshots from the Eisenheim Manor. So you have like a basement, a ground floor, it looks like an upper floor, and then the rooftop view. So what's the story behind this map?
So what you've actually got on screen is my museum map. I think the
sorry.
Essenheim map is the later one. That's okay. So this was, I think I'd been doing this about 3 months when I created this one. And it was the first map that was kind of really well received, and I got a lot of work and new patrons off the back of it. And this was the moment when I felt like this could actually become a full-time job.
That's great. So this is like your aha moment that usually an artist will just experience sooner or later.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, did you get that rush that I was talking about earlier, that tingle? I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but it's like if you hear a really good song, or you I don't know how to explain it, but it's a sensation. It kind of washes over you.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Absolutely, I get that with quite a lot of my work. Having that kind of creative outlet and being able to do something you really enjoy as a job, and also getting that kind of good feedback from it. Yeah, it's one.
When you get that feeling from within, that's probably the most rewarding aspect of creating something. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, you know you've done right. You've done right by yourself, by your family and friends, and to the hobby. So keep
Yes,
that
definitely.
feeling going, and don't make it too much of a job if you can help it. That's what I'm hearing from
Yes.
all of you. Try to keep it fun. Take a break once in a while and play in some games, so that you know that your artwork is still out there and valid, and that it plays well with other systems. And there's research that you can do on the buildings, but then you also have to be connected to the people that you're selling to, or that you are commissioning for.
Yes, yeah, of course, absolutely. A lot of what I do is research, not only on the design and the layout of the building, but how it's going to be used, who's going to be using it, what the audience.
Yeah, that's very important. I think when some people are creating, they lose touch of what it is they were started to do, and they get too wrapped up in the business side and the money side of things, and it just stops becoming a fun thing. It becomes more of a job or a chore, and I hope that doesn't happen to you, at least
Yeah, me
not in a
too.
large capacity anyways. So here is the manor. So this is this is what I was trying to show for the details for the manor. This is your recent work.
Yeah, this is more recent. This was a little over 2 months ago.
Yeah, now there's not a bearskin rug, at least not on this floor, but we have a wolfskin rug.
Yeah, well, you've got to change things up a little bit.
I was really looking for that bearskin rug, but I guess not. Not on this floor anyways. So I see you have a couple bathrooms. I mean, this is incredible. So who lives here? Who do you think lives here?
So whenever I'm creating a map, I find it helpful to also have kind of a story written in my head. It's not necessarily the story that the DM or GM is going to take on or that is going to be used. But my idea for this particular set of maps of this manor, which is 4 different floors, is that it's owned by Count Essenheim, and he is secretly a dragon. So if you look in on some of the closer details, especially on the other floors, there are statues of dragons. The furniture has dragon claws, the baths, things like that. There's paintings of dragons. There's subtle iconography. And then the basement layer is his actual lair and hoard.
Nice. Are you are you considering putting these up in other areas other than Patreon? Like, you're already into Roll20 and the Fantasy Ground store, or are you just kind of sticking to your own platforms for sailing?
No, absolutely. I'm trying to make them as widely available as possible. So everything, I release these sets weekly on Patreon, and then at the moment they're coming out on about a 2-month delay on Roll20. I'm currently talking to the guys at Fantasy Grounds as well and getting the shop set up over there, but the process of getting things approved is a little bit slower, simply because they have to go through Steam and get approval there as well. So they will be there, but it'll take a few weeks.
That's great. Good news. Um, I was noticing when I was researching for this that you're pretty much all over the place social media wise, and that's kind of good. You have just about every platform covered, and the content is still, fairly fresh. So, are you doing that yourself? Is someone helping you with that, or are you just kind of doing it when you can for your marketing?
No, that's all entirely me. I'm very much a one-man operation at the moment. I do the maps and the creation, all of the finance, the social media, the marketing, everything. Hence why I end up working most weekends, but it's really worth it at the moment. And I'm, trying to get my name out there and get the work in. It all has to be off my own back.
All right, cool. Um, is there any specific tools that you use other than just the standard? So I know most people use GIMP or they'll use Photoshop. Do you have any other tools that you might use, or do you just use those, or what's your process like for creating?
Yeah, my process is Photoshop and a digital drawing display tablet. Most of the stuff you see is hand drawn and hand painted, although some of the floor and wall textures I get from textures.com, which allow commercial licensing of their products. So if anyone is looking to make their own maps, that's a really good resource. They have thousands of tileable textures that you can use.
Nice. That's some good tips there. Um, so how do you know what to include or exclude from your project? So this is a big project. So I'm pretty sure you had stuff that you didn't want to keep, or I mean, there has to be a process here. You decided to go with the dragon motif and some of the different levels, which kind of goes with your story. But then there's also design elements that may or may not fit. Is there anything you would like to have done better? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I think probably the detail editing process is the part that takes me the longest with these maps. I'm always trying to find a balance between what makes it immersive and believable, but also leaves enough space for the whoever's running the map, running the game, to input their own ideas onto it, and also leave enough space for the players to literally move themselves around the game map. Um, when I'm placing the assets and setting up all the rooms, I'm kind of taking in. So my background is in architecture. That's where I'm trained, and a large part of architectural design. I use the same sorts of ideas when creating my maps, and that's thinking about how does someone use this space? What is their daily life like? How do these places interact? So that's really how I decide how to place things.
That's great. It's nice to have that extra background. Some people don't, but I'm pretty sure that they think similarly. Like, in three-dimensional space, how does this work? That's basically how you kind of have to perceive things in life. So one other question about your mapping and the industry itself. So what do you think makes your maps different from what's already out there? And it may be a hard question to answer, but you definitely have some redeeming qualities. I know a couple of myself, but I'll let you answer it.
Yeah, you're right. That is hard to answer, especially because there's such a variety of so many talented creators already around. What I try to do, I suppose, is combining my background in both design and architecture and art, create something that's believable, give that feeling of verisimilitude, that extra level of detail to help with storytelling, and also my maps are always these multi-level maps. So you can use them standalone, or you can use these 3 or 4 maps together to allow a kind of a more dynamic exploration for the players and more interesting gameplay.
Yeah, I was gonna say when I looked at your map sets initially, I thought, wow, this guy is a completionist because he's not just giving you, 1 or 2 rooms. He's giving you the whole place and then some. So yes, that is a redeeming quality that you have over most of the artists out there, is that your work is complete. And another thing that I want to tell you that I asked other members of the college and of the photography is, a lot of you get too busy and wrapped up in what you're doing. And I think one of your redeeming qualities is that you've taken the time to reach out and get to know the community. You're willing to talk, like on the show. You're open to communicating with people that are interested in this hobby. So I really appreciate that. That is definitely a redeeming quality that I look for in cartographers and even artists, anyone, to be honest. If you get too wrapped up in the work, I think you kind of lose that touch that makes it important, especially if you're going to market something. You got to get out there and connect with the people that support you. And it is very important to do that, even though you're overwhelmed. I think you would have to take some time to do that once in a while. And I appreciate that about artists that are willing to do that or make the time to do it. So that is a redeeming quality that you have that I appreciate.
Oh, thanks very much for saying that. And yeah, I completely agree. It's a very important part of this. And the tabletop role play game community is so welcoming and so nice and so inclusive that it's hard not to want to be involved.
Yeah, I definitely like to see you playing a game once in a while. And my suggestion for most of you is get your shows up. Start doing shows about your process. Um, maybe make it a patron award where you just record it and make a private link for your patrons. Whatever it is, I think it would add another dimension. And you're already going to be working anyways, so you might as well record it. And if you like the recording, you don't have to do it live necessarily, and then you can make that available. You can edit it, whatever you want to do to get your name out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Streaming and teaching my process is certainly one of my goals for the next year or so. For the time being, the biggest limitation is more of a hardware one. Running a Photoshop with large files and a digital display tablet and screen capture software all at once, it puts a lot of pressure on a laptop. So hopefully,
Yes,
we'll get there soon.
Yeah, I know. I've had Anna. She's been on here. She does a lot of 3-dimensional. Anna B. Meyer. She does digital photography, and she has 3 computers for that reason.
Yeah, I can believe it.
So one will sit there and compile and actually render, and it takes it like 24 hours to render the images. So I'm not sure exactly what she's doing, but she does her own photography from above in a plane and gets her photo textures and pictures from actual photos and the coloring especially. And she will blend that in with her 3-dimensional work. So yes, I think you have another computer in your future, Tom.
Yes, for sure.
One for work and one for compiling.
Yeah. I currently watch a few other map makers on Twitch. If anyone is looking for people, Kaora streams occasionally. Demil, Mr. Valor, Alyssa Faden. There's plenty out there, so there are people already doing it, and we'd like to grow that community.
Yeah, that is really cool. So is there any advice or tips or anything you would like to share with the community before you head out?
I mean, as for general tips, I came into map making from a design and art background rather than a game playing background. And I would recommend that anyone who wants to do these kinds of maps at least tries to get a grasp on some artistic fundamentals. Simple things like how forms work, how shadows work, how lighting works, color theory. You can pick it up very easy, very free, watch some YouTube videos, and it can really make a big difference. As for more specific tips, like you say, I'm always available. If people want to reach out to me and ask anything specific, they can. I'll hang around in the chat afterwards as well. So yeah, I'm always available. You can go through my Patreon page, all my social media, and my email address is there. So
That's great. All right. Well, thank you for coming on here. I appreciate it, and I will see you around.
yeah, thanks for having me. Talk soon.
Cheers. All right. Next up, we have Aaron Gentry. We know him as Vex.
I am doing good.
So, just first of all, I wanted to say thanks for showing up. Vex is actually a very active community member in our Fantasy Grounds College, and he's on daily chatting with people and talking about gaming. So I appreciate you being here. So explain to me what's your foray into role playing games. So what got you started in role playing games?
I started playing role-playing games, pen and paper role-playing games, that is, in college in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Mhm.
I remember my first game that I was introduced to was Shadowrun, which I didn't necessarily like. But the very next thing that we played was something that was brand new, just came out at the time, and that was 3rd edition D&D. And from there, I was hooked. And I played a lot of 3rd edition D&D and a lot of Star Wars D20. And then after college, I tried, I was getting into the workforce and stuff like that. And so I took a break from gaming, but a few years ago, I got back into it with 5th edition, and it's almost like a full-time hobby now.
So I'm looking at this desert-like map. What's the story behind this?
That's actually a creation. That's a work in progress version. There's a much more refined version, but that was what I had at the time. And I use assets that are originally made by Ross McConnell of 2 Minute Tabletops, and I use them with his permission to put together maps that go along with story or adventures. And this one is actually for it's hard to explain, but it's for a later level of my expanded Dungeon of the Mad Mage. And I don't want to spoil Dungeon of the Mad Mage for anyone, so I'm not going to explain the context of why I'm building a red desert in Dungeon of the Mad Mage, but it does make sense. It does fit into the story. And that is sort of an early version of that map. I've since done some more recoloring. In the finished version, the cacti are a little more muted. The brush is a little more colorful. And because I am crazy and weird sometimes, I added actual harness and reins to the horses, not just horses.
Oh, cool. So you've gone in and add more details since this photo was published.
Yeah, when I found out that my Sunday was going to be free and that I had time to participate in Mapper's Delight 2, this was one of the ones I was working on, and I just sent you this one as one of the maps. I mean, I'm still happy with this map, and it's still plenty usable, but it wasn't finished in this stage.
Right. So now I'm at the mansion constructor. So what's the story behind this guy here? I have two versions, and one of them looks like it has water damage or something.
No. So this one is again another one from my expanded Dungeon of the Mad Mage, and the one I sent you earlier was the original export file from Dungeon Painter Studio, which is what I used to put the assets together. The second one, the bigger one there on the left, is the finished version where I've gone in and I've added some more details and I've recolored some things. In this one, it's a side passage that the players go into, and then they go into an actual Morden Canaan's magnificent mansion.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the wizard's mansion, and he's kind of waiting there for them. And in those 3 rooms that circle around the north end there, each one looks out onto a different fantastic vista, which there is art to go along with that is included with the adventure. And in particular, the really interesting thing is the wizard's room of oddities on the right hand side, which if you circle around from the upper left going clockwise, that is Excalibur in the stone, the holy hand grenade of Antioch, an empty display case that has a plaque on it that says Wand of Unlimited Wishes. And then down at the bottom, that's Han Solo and Carbonite, and then King Tutankhamun in his sarcophagus, and then obviously in the center, that is a portal to the Nether.
Cool.
And this one, I've gotten quite a few emails from DMs that were really happy that I included so many crazy, weird things in a D&D game. It makes players really, laugh, and it takes them out of the tension and stuff.
And also, it kind of ties real life experiences outside of the hobby into bringing it into the hobby. Because all those different elements, yes, they are fictional somewhat, but they also kind of give you a familiarity. So if your players know what that is, then they get a laugh, or it might stir up an emotion, or perhaps even a memory of a show or of some kind of book they've read. So that's very clever. So the assets that you use are tabletop, are already are produced. Have you made some of your own already? I lost you there, Vex.
I'm sorry. I think that was my fault. I was pushing the wrong button to talk. I'm not used to using push to talk.
Okay.
Yes, I do make some of my own assets. I do mostly use Ross's assets. In particular the cacti from that desert map. Those were my creation. They were my assets. I do a lot of recoloring of Ross's assets. If you go to Ross's site and you download his assets for free, like all the couches and chairs and things like that, and the beds, they're red, for example. Or like that desert map, I had to work on recoloring all the assets used to make the ground, because the original asset was just kind of a muted brown for dirt, and I wanted to make a red desert, so I had to kind of do several variations actually to get the red right. But I do a lot of recoloring of his assets.
That's cool.
Because I like really colorful maps.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I do too. So let's see. So I didn't want to make this a show about the Dungeon Masters Guild. However, since you are a creator there, I just took a snapshot of all your different projects you're working on. So do you include these maps in some of these projects, or are they a separate thing, or how does it work?
Well, there's 2 different things that you're going to find when you when you search for my name or click on my name on Dungeon Masters Guild, if it's a if it's just me listed as the author, your chances are you're going to find some of these maps if it's an adventure. There are a few modules that are just made for Fantasy Grounds to do specific things, like I can see there at the bottom of that list that you're showing my weather generator. That's just nested tables. It doesn't have any images or maps, but all of my expanded dungeon levels come with maps. And then the other thing that I do is I work for Grim Press, and I do conversions of PDFs for Fantasy Grounds format. So like adaptable NPCs 2 and Slinker, Sailor, Soldier, Spy. Those are all conversions of other people's work that I've done to make them usable in Fantasy Grounds, or more accessible, that is.
Right. So you're trying to help bring more content to the platform and not
Yeah.
just. That's cool. I appreciate that. So if you had any choice or chance to turn this into a full-time profession, what direction do you think you'd want to go? Do you want to stay making adventures? Do you want to work with maps? Maybe a little of both. I don't know how that would work, but some people do everything themselves, but it takes a lot longer. Some people don't mind doing collaborations. Would you prefer to do your own work, or maybe work up to a level where you can start developing your own style, your own maps, or even perhaps just keep in the way you're going and just keep your nose to the grindstone and just keep cranking out content?
Well, for one thing, it's hard for me to think of myself as an artist in this particular field, because I am not that talented as like what people traditionally think of as an artist. I mean, I have painted in the past. I have drawn in the past. Like every human at one point has drawn something. I'm not very good at it. I take somebody else's assets and I put an artistic spin on them that is my own. Um, I think I'm better at creating the story that goes along with these maps than I am at actually making the maps. And I look at all the previous artists today, and I know Chris's work, and he's coming up next. And I know it's like everybody is better at what they do than me. I feel like a fraud sometimes, and I have to tell myself, no, you're not. You're doing something that's needed, and that's always the case. So can I see myself turning this into a full-time job? I already consider it a full-time hobby. But no, I make enough money on DM's Guild to buy more stuff on DM's Guild and to fund buying, enough stuff to fuel my D&D hobby, and that's all I really want to do.
That's cool.
A lot of the things that I make for Fantasy Grounds, specifically the tables and like my random treasure tables, which are easily one of my most popular items on DM's Guild, as well as my vicious mockery generator, which are just mostly different ways of making nested tables that do some interesting things for Fantasy Grounds users. I put those up as pay what you want, and most users do download them for free, which I have no problem with, because I just want Fantasy Grounds to succeed because I really love the software.
Well, that's very admirable. I appreciate that, and I think that in time you will find a more specific niche. And if it is just telling stories on maps or doing your own stories, that's fine. That's going to be a whole nother thing to develop and keep going. I like to do the same thing you do. I like using other people's maps and assets. I don't want to spend a lot of time creating those myself. So it's much easier if I just do it, um, just in my own time, and develop and focus more on story, growing the community, keeping the community going, and, those sort of things. And yeah, so I'm really glad that you made it and that you got past the deadline. And you've definitely deserve a spot on here, regardless of their level of talent. You've also made sure that you've made yourself active in our community, and I hope that your talent and your skill will grow, and that you'll be able to share your desire and your passion with the rest of the people. So even if you don't have an artistic bone in your body, you definitely have the passion and desire, and I don't ever want to see that leave. So keep that regardless of what happens with the maps or any of the other avenues that you might try.
Yeah, I sometimes don't feel like I'm really an artist, but I do definitely feel as like a creative personality.
Mhm.
And this is I mean it all really started the map making for me with I opened up Horde of the Dragon Queen, and I wasn't really happy with the maps as far as for use with virtual tabletops,
Right.
especially with Fantasy Grounds, because it does have some very quirky things when it comes to image size and quality and stuff, and you kind of have to work with it. So I started making maps just to kind of replace or supplement the ones that were available in that particular module, and that's kind of where it all started about a year ago for me as far as making maps.
Okay.
And but yeah, I definitely feel like everyone out there, not just me, even if you're unsure about creating something, just try it. The worst thing that could happen is that you're not happy with the results and you don't share it with anyone, but you still are going to learn by creating something, and you'll get better by repeating that process.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people give up right away, so try to keep at it and don't give up so quickly. Anything else you want to say before we go on to our next guest?
I can't think of anything.
So I have your last map up here before we get going. So this is the Orc Tower. Any idea of what was going on here? Like, what's the is this your early work? Is this something that you used?
This is more recent.
Mhm.
This is for another series of adventures that I do plan to eventually publish on DM's Guild. It's actually a series that I've talked to you about a one-on-one, but it's for my what I'm calling my background adventure series. And the idea is, I know there's a lot of DMs out there, especially for 5th edition, that really don't like starting campaigns at first level. They'll start players off at second or third level, partially because players or characters are very, very weak at first level and very easy to kill. The other reason is a lot of people find characters at first level kind of boring. And I had the idea that because I have some players in my own groups that they have problems coming up with stories about their character's past, like writing a background, that what if I made adventures that were specifically designed for level 1 characters with a one-on-one intention, the DM and the player alone, and they play through a short adventure that lets them get to second level. It also gives them a unique story that they can then later share in character at the joined table with the entire group that is unique to them. And if I create enough of these based on character backgrounds and archetypes and things like that, then there is like I could have a giant package of them ready to go in future sessions as well. And then I realized, well, other DMs might like this idea. So the idea is once I get enough of them done, I can package them and sell them. In this particular case, it is for a ranger or druid character who kind of has the hermit background.
Mhm.
And in this case, there's a map previous to this one where they meet someone else in the forest that is searching for someone who got lost in the woods. They both have found the scene of some sort of battle, and they can follow the footprints or the blood drops, and those have been included on the map to the point where they find that a group of orcs has killed this person and dragged him back to their tower, and there's a little encounter here with the orcs as they try to save the person, although ultimately they find out that he's been killed.
Huh.
And this was one of the first maps that I experimented with making the trees opaque, so that you can see the ground and see what's underneath them to make more of the map a little bit more usable.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I really liked the way it turned out.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I like your idea, and as far as like the first level and getting people into the game. So map making isn't just about coloring and drawing and making assets. It's also about the story behind it. So some people are good at tying those together. Some people just make them and there's really no story to it, which I really doubt that's the case in most applications. But it's good to be connected with your artwork through a story or some kind of idea. Just to throw down a map and just make it, be very rare and lucky if you made something viable. So it's really good to have that connection to your artwork. So very good. I like it.
Thanks, and thanks for having me.
No problem. So who do we got next? So welcome.
Thanks a lot, Aaron. Yeah, I was really glad you did a Mappers Delight too. I think it's really great that we can get so many people together and show off their work. Hey.
I'm glad that you were able to stick around. So I have a slide up here. I made this slide with some things that are important to me, and it kind of helps wrap up the entire session here before we get into your background and such. So, Game Tile Warehouse is a moniker for your store. Is that correct?
Yeah, I needed a website name and it just sort of popped into my head. And I like the little square tile there. I've had a few people say, hey, that looks a bit crappy, you should redo it. But I actually like it. It reminds me where I've come from and how far I've come.
Yeah, I'd like it too. So when I look at Game Tile Warehouse initially, I am thinking of this big commercial blockbuster company that pumps out all these tiles and gaming assets. But once I really got to know who the person is behind this, I think the Game Tile Warehouse is more aptly named because of the artist's capacity to think and to have a lot of different assets, and somebody that thinks above and beyond the normal uh, traditional map making and how it ties in with the gaming industry and also with stories. So diversity is something that I've noticed from your work since I've been associated with you. Dedication for sure. I mean, I don't know too many people, in or out of any hobby or work that's this dedicated. And then, your work rate and how hard you work is really reflects on the quantity, the quality, and the diversity that you supply to the community and to your art. Um, you interact with the community a lot more, and I think that is important. And you have certainly changed or remedied that over the last few years. I think you've come from somebody who does a lot of solo projects and things for their own purposes to somebody that still takes commissions once in a while and actually builds a ton of assets and cranks out a whole bunch of maps. But you have also been able to retain your artistic freedom, which is very, very important in artwork. You haven't sold out. You've pretty much kept true to yourself, and you haven't let too many people talk you out of what you're doing. So my hats off to you.
Thanks very much, Aaron. That's very kind. Um, just a one-man army that really, really, really loves fantasy, and it's really nice to still be in the industry and to be doing what I do. I really love it.
So I'm just at a page here where we're showing different varieties of projects that you've been involved with.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you're not just doing maps. You're doing tiles, which are basically maps, but I mean, you've done board games, you do tokens, I've seen you've done cards. I mean, you're all over the place. You've made your own dice, for crying out loud. What is up? So you are totally you're all the way up to you're not knee deep. You're all the way in. So all these products here. I mean, what is this? What is this? Where's this going? I like what I see. I see a ton of assets. I think with the right people and the right timing, you're gonna blow up or something. Something's good's gonna happen. I don't know when, but tell us a little bit about these projects that you're involved with here. I mean, some of these are old, some are new, but give me an example of some of the things that you've been involved
Sure, man. So if you look closely at those printed tiles, which I did uh, in 2015 with Game Crafter, you'll see that they're for HeroQuest. And HeroQuest was a game brought out in the 1980s by Milton Bradley, I think. And it was really instrumental in getting me involved in fantasy. It really captured my imagination and blew me away in terms of what was possible and what was, like what was really out there in this world I've been born into, with terms of story and visuals and just that ability to sit down with the people and friends and play a game. And it wasn't just like Monopoly or anything else. It was just like you take on characters and you fight monsters, and it's just awesome. It really stuck with me, and I decided a long time ago I wanted to make my own game. So what you're seeing here is the result of my research into what it takes, and me gradually developing each element I would need to produce and execute a board game, from the tokens to the art to the world maps, all of it.
with. So these are printed and digital. Even some of these are physical. So like the dice you had there, um, I see that you also have a diversity of different genres. You have horror, space. I mean, there's just everything. I'm really impressed. Um, is there anything that you haven't done that you would like to?
Yeah, I'll complete my Meanders collection. I know there's a lot there already,
Mm-hmm.
but I've got a vision in my head of a world that's got a lot more maps than it already has in it. So I'd really like to complete that with another mm, 500 or so to cover all the terrains. I mean, that's kind of what I set out to do. Haven't quite done it yet, so that's what I'll be focusing on this year.
This early maps here, this one in the center with the jaw, I immediately freaked out when I saw that. Um, I got it kind of emotionally disturbs me. Like I'm
That's
afraid if I stick my fingers there, it's gonna bite them off. But then
good.
at the same time, it inspires me to want to put people into that situation, especially if they irritate me during one of my sessions. They can go to that crystal cave with that big maw in the center. So what
Yeah,
was that? What's the story behind that guy?
I'm a super fan of H.P. Lovecraft, and that was one of my earliest maps, and I really wanted to capture like a sense of alienness that comes from his stories and his ethos, and just the way he weaves mythos of these dark gods from out of space that live between the worlds and things like that. And I didn't see any of that really in RPG maps at the time, and it's just something I wanted to explore and see what it would look like and how it felt.
And that's definitely, I can feel it right now. Those jagged teeth. Yeah, my arm is hurting right now thinking about that. But yeah, another thing that's foreboding about that is that you can't really see, but there's a cavity there, and that could just be an endless tunnel where you get chewed up into pieces and you just keep falling. You don't necessarily go anywhere, so that's pretty scary. Yeah, so explain the meanders thing while we're here. This doesn't really do it much justice, but explain the meander concept, especially for people that are new that haven't really sampled your work yet.
Okay, sure, man. Meanders are a sinkable terrain, basically, act like small dungeon tiles but on a massive scale. So you can cover your table with huge sprawling pathways of connected terrain in seconds. Same with virtual tabletop. And they have a repeating entrance and exit system on them so that all meanders will line up with one another, regardless of genre or how far I go into the series. And at present, there's about 1,100 of these 27 by 18-inch battle maps. So virtually billions of combinations if you want to join them all together. Or you can join them to each other. You can join them left and right, top down. The idea was just to minimize the amount of work I had to do as a DM crafting terrain, but it sort of grew into its own monster. And I think I've done 8 Kickstarters for meanders now, and not showing any sign of slowing.
Yeah, I mean, this is incredible work. I mean, I don't even know where you come up with some of the assets. You have an incredible work rate. I mean, if you look at all these things, what do you say? What 99% of them are hand created or sculpted by you? Like the rocks and the trees and the webs and everything in these pictures?
Yeah, that's right. If you're looking to get started with mapping, a good thing is to take your camera around the property where your house is and just take some good photos of the ground, of trees, of wood. And you find that as you make large maps, they're like a macro of smaller tokens. So it's the same principles, just applied on a much smaller scale. So you can turn what looks like a piece of wood into a bridge or a box or a fence. You can turn it into a whole bunch of things. It's just a matter of thinking about what you need, what you want to represent, and the best way to go. So yeah, I make all my own tokens mostly. I get some textures here and there that are royalty free, just to patch it out a bit. But yeah, for the most part, everything is my own because I don't want to. I just like making my own worlds, I guess.
Yeah. And I noticed that this one is modern and this other one is more of a fantasy thing. So these are kind of new. Are these part of the meanders? I can't tell because of the way they're oriented. Kind of looks like meanders, but
The one on the left is a LMOP map
mm-hmm.
compatible with. I
Yep.
think it's Thunder Tree. So it's a larger scale map, but it uses the same meander style artwork. So if you wanted to patch your meanders in, you could. And the one on the right is from my modern series, which is a meander and would join up with any other.
Nice. So you have some transitional work here. So these are not your typical fantasy type maps. This is where you're getting into your diversity. I always like your water textures. I can see a little bit of that down there on the modern map. And the rugs and the detail that you've done in this Victorian mansion is incredible. I don't even know. I mean, you had come up with doilies and print patterns and such that comes from that era, all the way down to that little typewriter. I'm really impressed with the amount of detail, and you even have a book that's sticking out of the bookshelf, like someone went to go grab it, or maybe it's a book that's wider than the rest. Typically, when you see maps like this, all the books would be the same size. They might recolor some of them, and they don't necessarily have dimension to them. But I think the fine details that you went through shows. They even have worn floorboards where people would walk around a lot. You can kind of see that in the wood where people have walked, and it really shows. The only thing I think we're missing here is uh, to have somebody walking through, actually walking through it.
Yeah, that's like the books in themselves. Like I find that if I build on a more detail first, to build a single book and do the best I can with that, and then add another one, and then another one, and then soon I've got a book stack, and then I can add a bookshelf, and then I can sort of muddle up, and eventually, before you know it, from a single book, you've got an entire world.
Yeah, that's incredible because, like I said, they're all usually uniform size. You generally don't get the imperfection that makes it look real, and that's one of the things I like. You even have a door that's partially open; it's not all the way closed, and that's very detail oriented because when older houses settle, the framework doesn't always settle right. So when you try to close doors, they don't shut correctly. They're not quite square. So all those little details kind of shows in this one photo. The sci-fi map is very interesting, and I want to say the lighting and the color is just outstanding. Very modern, very techy. Um, it gives me the feel of a space resort or some sort of place where you have some leisure time. That's what that. That's what I get from that photo without
That's
looking at a
exactly what it
title.
is.
I mean, you got video games, you got a jukebox, you have some places to sit around and eat. Looks like you might even have like a bar. Yeah. So if I was in space in a space lab, I would definitely want to spend as much time as I could in that spot.
Just don't drink the green one.
So we have some of your favorites. So let's talk about these. So these are samples from your meanders packs, it looks like. And that alligator really looks like it's coming up out of the water. That was really well done. How you blended that into the green, brackish water. And the bridge, the rainbow, it does remind me of when I was a kid, when I used to go camping. And I would see that rainbow, and I thought that was so cool. The mist coming off the water. I have actually seen that in real life from a waterfall. And
Yeah,
that
man.
spiraling gemstone thing is it's just like it goes on forever. It's like there's no end. It's like a deep hole. And I have to say, even despite all those nuances, I really like the city map because I can identify with it. I can smell the smoke. I know the leaves are falling, and I see the rubbish laying around that people have kind of left, and they forgot to pack it up before fall hit. So I can really relate to that map. It just reminds me of going through an old village in Europe or something like that. So tell me how you feel about these maps. Like what's your favorite? Why is it your favorite?
So I would say the one on the far right, the Australian one, is my favorite, just because I was able to successfully capture what I was what I had envisioned in my head, and it just really captures the Australian landscape. I've never seen it depicted in a RPG map before. Australia is where I was born, it's where I'm from, and I think it really brings to life for me the alienness of this country, and I think that is really important for a map, is to be able to convey an emotion, especially for a place somewhere someone may have never been. And I was just really pleased with how this one worked out, especially the crocodiles.
Yeah. And that bridge is very precarious, but being how beautiful the water is, I think I would even try to cross it, even though it looks really rickety. I mean, I'd probably have to crawl on my hands and knees, but I would definitely go across. It
Yeah, I
does
like
look.
these. Sorry, go ahead, Aaron.
Look, I just noticed that some of them are burned. That the wood looks like someone tried to set fire to that bridge.
Yeah, so I think I like these maps because um, I used to draw. I used to draw a lot, and when I draw, it's on a 2D piece of paper, and after a while, it reaches its limits. And it's the same with digital art, except when I discovered like Photoshop and GIMP and layers, I was just amazed that you could more or less, in some instances, you could punch a hole through space, and the map would go on forever. And all you had to really do was just sort of carry it through and make the art look like it was eternal. And the other one with the rainbow and the water and the bridge and the trees, I was really happy with it because it gave a sense of the realism, freshness of nature. And that's something I've always paid very, very close attention to, the things around me, but particularly the way nature is and what it looks like. And I love those things. And I think that's why I love being a mapper the most, is that I'm able to play around and try and represent them and sort of reveal some of the secrets that nature's shown me. And I think that's why my maps look the way they do, because nature is just stunning, just beautiful, and I love it. And that's one of the elements I've tried to bring really strongly to all of my maps, is that immersion into nature.
You know, I can actually smell. I mean, at least I can reminisce about the smell of that fresh water coming up as the mist, and the use of your shadows and your reflections on your maps are incredible. It's not something that's very easily done. Sure, it takes some practice and a lot of thought. So those things alone would be very challenging for me to figure those out. I mean, I get the idea, but I don't know how to produce that result without a lot of research and help.
No, I didn't either.
So how long have you been doing this?
4 years now.
4 years. So that's not a long time in the scope of artwork. I mean, it is, but it isn't. Um, there are people who've been doing this for 30, 40 years and they haven't even come close to the detail on here. Of course, that depends on the application they're putting it into too. So what is the story about this spiraling cavern? What was that like for you? What was your thought process in that? Or what did you feel like?
So I was just trying to add an extra element to what was a gold mine. and I wanted to create a sense of what some would know as the Underdark, and a descent into the lower reaches of the mine. A lot of the games I played, they used to treat dungeons as levels, and the lower you went, the harder it got, and the more alien it got, the more crazy and creepy and magical it got. And so I was just trying to depict that transition from what was already a pretty unusual looking mine to something far more sinister and ominous below.
And the town? What do you think about that little section there? The cobblestones and the rooftop views.
So I was actually really proud of this city series, but this map in particular, because I was just fell in love with the fact that how good the trees looked when I turned them to autumn, and putting all the dead leaves on the ground is just so beautiful. I think autumn's my favorite season. But I'd also done uh, like 800 nature-based maps, but no towns for them to lead to, because originally meanders were just supposed to be like a fill-in where you went and put down a whole bunch of pathways and extra terrain for the players to explore between major quests. But then as they got more popular and people wanted more and more expansions, I moved into the city arena, and I was actually really challenged by how hard it is to depict a fantasy city. But I enjoyed the challenge, and I think I did a decent job, and I really enjoyed it. I probably should have started with the city first and then done the nature, but I just did it backwards. Bit uh, bit common for me to do things in a different way, I suppose.
So the smoke, you know what, the time of day for that is probably about 10:30 in the morning is what I get from that picture. Because of the amount of light and the fire, it doesn't look like the fires are burning heavily, but they have enough flame to perhaps heat up some water for tea or
Yeah, to get technical, the time zone on all of my maps is about 2 p.m. You can see the shadow
Oh, okay.
sinking. Yeah, so I just started with that and tried to keep it consistent, and it just sort of became a sticking point where I had to keep doing it. Otherwise, if you join two maps together, it wasn't going to match up. And also, as I evolved as an artist and learned how to do things that look better, I also had to refrain from putting them in too much, because then the early meanders wouldn't match with the later meanders. So, in some sense, I've had to sort of restrain my creative impulses a bit to try and make them all look the same.
right. Yeah, this is incredible. Let's go to the next slide. So this is talking about the different ways that people can interface with you. So you have your game tile warehouse, you have Kickstarters, and how many Kickstarters did you say you've done successfully?
Successfully, I think 18 to 20.
Wow. Um, yeah. So this is no joke, guys. This guy puts out a lot of work. These are just examples of some of the other projects he's working on. I did this dungeon rooms, which I totally bought into those, and they also came with assets. And then these Solomon Square tiles, they may seem simple, but when you combine them together, and then you have all these different textures and colors, they actually make a really nice way to um, lock different tiles together and kind of make your own maps with them. And I was really impressed with the variety, and I always thought that that was a good idea to create those. and they are a little different than what you normally do. So I kind of appreciated that. There's a lot more to this Chris map hatter. I wish there was more time to get into all the different sets. And I think in the future I would like to do a 2-hour show with you where we just go through all your maps and talk about them. But what I have up now are something you're working on that's fairly recent, and these are in the works. So you have that Turangs, Caverns, and the Rocket Tower, and the Indominium Fall. What's that about?
So I don't usually do overland maps, and I've just been exploring them and turning my attention to them because I think there's a lot of potential. These three in particular are actually again for Lost Mines of Phandelver, but they allow you to play through it, but without copying the layout or the format of the maps. They still have the same features, such as spots where you need to hide goblins or something like that, or an approach to a castle, etc. It's just my take on it.
That's cool. I see that there's a lot of potential for reusability, so that's good. So it doesn't have the generic, this is what I use all the time, but at the same time, it's not too detailed or it's locked into something specific. So that's very good for reuse. That's something I look for when I buy, purchase things like this, invest in them. I'm looking for reusability. And if it's a map for one specific dungeon, once you're through with that adventure, and if you don't run it again, you're probably not going to see that map. But if it's flexible enough, like these are, you can turn these different ways, and you can end up reusing these quite a bit. So I really like the replay value of a lot of your projects. Most of them have a really high replayability, and they're not so specific.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, man.
Yeah, replay value to me is important for investing into maps, unless you're making your own. So I kind of went through and kind of reminisced with you about your map making and your connection with nature, and just your general feel about making maps. So in all honesty, I think you have a lot of talent, and more talent than 4 people combined sometimes. But what is it that Chris truly wants? What does Chris want? What does the map hatter want? Are those 2 people the same? How are they
They are the
connected?
same. Yeah, they are the same. And what I want is to finish the final pieces that bring all of this together into one massive game project, which I've called GS, Broken Gods.
Can you tell us a little bit about GS without without going into a ton of detail? Because I know it's full of detail.
Yeah, GS is like my attempt at a super version of Hero Quest to try and capture those days of yore where we could sit around with a bunch of friends and lose ourselves in a dungeon landscape. Um, Only it has all of the things I thought were missing. Um, it has a lot of advancement, which I've sort of been exploring and studying games and game mechanics and game theory and all sorts of things related to games, especially volition, which is the use of resources and objects and things in a world that makes sense. Where a lot of games just have these things, uh, and they don't actually add anything to the character's life or purpose, or there's no real reason to get them. So everything that is in my world is important. It has a use, and if it's there, it has reasons, and it has multiple ways to use it. So all of these maps and all of these tokens and all of these skills I've been trying to build are to try and help me express that world that I've got in my head, with all of these names and all of these places and characters and a huge story, and it's just trying to bring it all together. So I'm probably maybe a year away from completing that massive task, I think.
Well, that's a big thing on the horizon for you. I'm really proud to have met you, and I know that you've contributed a
Thanks.
lot to Fantasy Grounds College. You've committed a lot of time to your hobby, but you've also made time for me personally and for people in our community, and I really appreciate that. That is probably the best redeeming quality that you have, above and beyond your talent. I think that people appreciate your work. I haven't heard anything negative. Um, yeah, I would really like to see you grow, and maybe you'll meet somebody that will help pull the rest of this out of you so that you can achieve your goal.
Thanks, Aaron. It's been really nice to get to know you and everyone else in the college and everyone associated in all of the RPG industries. It's not that big an industry. Usually, everyone knows someone that knows someone, and I'm just really happy to have added the value I have to people's lives and games, and just allow them to uh, enjoy themselves, having simple fun. You know. I think that's really worthwhile and the best expenditure of my energy.
That's great. Do you have one word of wisdom or advice or insight that you can impart on the community or on people who want to make their own maps?
Sure. Start small, perfect the basics, and build slowly. Don't try and jump massive leaps ahead. I mean, sure you can, but just be kind to yourself. Realize it's a learning process, and you just have to keep at it. Can't give up. And if you don't give up, you'll get to where you're going every time.
It's great. I think we're going to call this a stream. We've been going for about 3.5 hours,
Yeah.
and I know you could use a little nap or some rest. Um, for everyone else that made the show, um, I appreciate you guys stopping by. We will be putting this up on YouTube shortly, and we will be providing the links to all the authors that were shared in here. And Fantasy Grounds College is, we focus on trying to get the community together. We also show people how to use Fantasy Grounds. That's our main claim to fame. We also hope that people can use it to express themselves and that they can share their artwork and their knowledge. And I think everyone has something to contribute, whether it be acting or writing or making maps or maybe just knowing what people to get together. There is a lot of indirect things that you can do to help the community, and to think that you're on your own, you're crazy. There's tons of people out there that would love to share your ideas and help you work out something. So I invite you guys to come to the Fantasy Grounds College. Um, we are a learning community. We do offer some one shots, but mainly we offer classes to learn how to use Fantasy Grounds. And people like Chris and some of the other authors have created content for Fantasy Grounds. And I'm hoping that you'll be inspired to do the same. And also, I'm hoping that anybody out there looking for some good, hardworking artists, I mean, they're all over the place. Uh, Consider donating or joining their Patreons. or even just, sending them a message and saying, hey, I love your work. I mean, that's all it would take in some cases to get somebody inspired to keep going. It's a lot of labor and it's a lot of work to do these things. So I think I'm going to call that a wrap. If anyone's left over and you're still around, go ahead and drop down into the lobby or the Mappers Delight 2 lobby, and I will be calling this a stream. So good gaming, everyone, and I hope to see you around. Bye bye.